Hey, deserving listeners. So my mentor, Paul David, died recently. And some of you might remember him coming on the podcast earlier this year, talking about his Alzheimer's diagnosis and his decision to have physician-assisted suicide in Switzerland because it's not legal in the United States. Well, he went through with that recently, and he died. He's dead. And before he died, we had a living wake where everyone could get together before he died with him there and have appreciations and get-togethers and hugs and a last goodbye for some people. But he and his wife got a severe case of COVID, so they couldn't attend. He was so sick, he couldn't even attend a Zoom call, right? But we recorded it, so he got to watch the recording at least. But that was a letdown. But like I said, I did talk with him on the phone periodically, and it was good. It felt good to have those conversations and to, I don't know, just talk about the old days and talk about his feelings, how he felt about everything that he was going through. He really, really did not want to put his family, his wife in particular, through the torment of having a spouse with Alzheimer's as it progresses. It could be very painful. It could be very hard. It can be very scary for everybody, including the person with Alzheimer's. Not everyone, but for some people with Alzheimer's, it can result in personality changes, depression, anxiety, paranoia, terror, aggression, and it can last for a long time. And the way that he saw it, past a certain point of degradation, it's not really him anymore, you know? And he didn't want to go through it himself, but he particularly didn't want to put his family through it. He had known what it was like because he had a mother and a grandmother, close people in his life who had Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia, very similar to Alzheimer's, and he saw the effects, the torment. He also didn't want to drain the finances of the family. He was financially oriented and saved money well and didn't want to just throw all that away that he had worked his whole life for. So yeah, he died, and it still hasn't really hit me. It's hard to internalize. It feels surreal. Intellectually, I understand that he's dead, but I still feel like I'll run into him at some point or talk to him on the phone or something. I don't know. It's just hard to fully accept or internalize or wrap your mind around, really. And for those who don't know, he was a huge figure in my life for 30 years, particularly 25 years. Pretty much my entire career as a professor was because of him. I don't know if I ever would have been a professor. And there's a chance that I might not have started this podcast because the podcast was started partially due to my experience as a teacher, and I wanted to teach the masses at some point, And one could say that at least the skills involved in being a podcaster were developed as a professor, and I'm quite positive I never would have been a professor if it wasn't for him, or at least it would have been a long time after he really convinced me to become a professor right after I graduated with my master's when I was still 26 years old and all the other students were older than me. It was a terrifying thing, and he was very convincing in that he believed in me. And he was there with me really close with me for years at different periods. I mean, he was always there, but there were different periods of time when he really was there and I really needed him, and he showed up for me. He took the time. He would volunteer his time, and he was a very caring person, very open person, he could be very vulnerable. He was extremely hardworking. The program at Antioch would be half of what it is today if it wasn't for him, and that's not hyperbole. He fought and fought and fought for everything. He would fight against administration. He would fight against the state of Washington. He would fight against accreditors. He would fight for students. He would fight other people that would try to tear us down. And he would work and work and work, and he would volunteer his time for the program, for students, for colleagues, for his clients. This isn't even talking about all the help that he provided his clients. He was a very hard-working therapist for decades. 45 years, maybe longer, 50 years, something, a long time. And even when he didn't need to, he still had a pretty big load of clients. Like when us professors would be at the university, we were given Mondays to see clients. It was a requirement because if you're going to teach therapy, you also have to be a therapist. And so we were given that day off from the university to have a practice. And so, that's what we all did. I did that. And I would see, maybe 6, 7 clients, because after that it gets a little hard to concentrate. But he would see many clients on Monday, but then he would see clients also throughout the week after work at the university. And anyway, so in this episode, I want to present to you 2 interviews that I had with him. I had him on the podcast a number of times, but I feel like these 2 are kind of good bookends. The first one is going to be an interview I did with him on the podcast in 2016, and this episode was for a podcast called the Couple and Family Therapy Podcast. When I became, so he promoted me into it. He built the Couple and Family Therapy program at Antioch University, Seattle, and for many years he was preparing me for taking over his job as program director. And so I became program director in 2015, and as a part of that, I thought I would start a second podcast after Psychology in Seattle for the Couple and Family Therapy program, because I wanted to highlight professors and students, and I also wanted to advertise for the program, because a lot of people will tell me that they would come to Antioch in Seattle because they heard me talk about it on Psychology in Seattle, and I thought, well, why not just make a podcast that's specifically for the Couple and Family Therapy program and highlight all these wonderful professors and all these wonderful students and all the work that they're doing, maybe therapists in the area, that kind of stuff. But I had, for the first episode of that podcast, naturally, I interviewed the master himself, Paul David, because he was the founder of the program. So I used that opportunity to drill down on the history of the program. And in this episode, it's a lot of us talking about the history of the program, but it's also just a glimpse into our relationship at the time. Then after that interview, I want to play for you another interview that I did earlier this year, right? So this would have been, 8 years later? What is that? 8 years later in 2024, after he learned that he had Alzheimer's and that he had already committed to having physician-assisted suicide. So let's listen to that interview from 2016. Hello and welcome to the Couple and Family Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda, chair of the Couple and Family Therapy program at Antioch University, Seattle. Since this is our first episode of the podcast, I thought it would be fitting to interview the master himself, Dr. Paul David, since he is the founder and he's been the chair of the program since its inception. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you so much, Kirk.
I thought I would start the podcast with the speech I gave recently. A couple months ago, Paul, you had a party at your lovely home on Queen Anne, and you handed out awards to everyone. And I was also sworn in as the new chair of the program. It was a lot of fun, and here's the speech I gave.
I'll remind you, you pledged allegiance.
That's right. Yeah, I had to swear on the student handbook that I would be loyal to the program and do everything that you had set forth, or what was the vow?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Basically, we replicated the presidential oath.
Yeah, it was a wonderful moment. It was very warm. All the other professors were there and the staff and, our significant others and whatnot. It was really great.
It was fun.
Yeah. So here's the speech I gave. Since I met Paul 20 years ago, we have had countless conversations about everything from teaching courses to our personal lives. But I want to talk about just one conversation in particular, a conversation that shaped the rest of my life. When I entered the master's program at the young age of 24, 20 years ago, I was terrified of professors and especially Paul. So when I bumped into him in the hallway just before graduation and he asked to meet with me, I was terrified. In that meeting, we had a conversation about my post-graduation plans. He asked if I was interested in teaching. However, I had no experience as an instructor and no plans to teach and very little confidence as a young therapist. So I asked him why he was giving me this amazing offer, and he said, "Because I believe in you." That moment changed my life. He believed in me, and therefore I believed in myself. For the record, I have never applied for a job at Antioch, so without his pushing me, I'm fairly certain I would never have been an educator. Along these lines, 17 years ago, he convinced me to be an adjunct instructor, even though I was underqualified and had no idea what I was doing. After 5 terrifying years, I quit because it was too stressful. A year later, he convinced me to be an adjunct again, because Paul's very persuasive. Then I quit again because of the stress. A few years later, he convinced me to take a visiting faculty position. Later, he made me teaching faculty and then core faculty. And as a final act, he is giving me his job as chair of the CFT program, the Couple and Family Therapy program. No words can describe how honored I am to become chair. By far, it is the pinnacle of my career and might always be that way. But I know I will never be as awesome as Paul, and let me tell you why. Almost 30 years ago, in 1987, almost 30 years ago, Paul, you single-handedly built the CFT program from the ground up, which has become one of the largest MFT programs, marriage and family therapy programs, in the world. He has taught and mentored thousands of therapists. Sometimes I just like to think about all the clients who have benefited from the good work of these many therapists. It's truly amazing to think about how much influence he has had on our community in this way. Him working with all those therapists who have done all that great work with all those clients. It's just amazing to think about his influence, his positive influence on our community. So Paul has been many things to me. When I attended Open House 20 years ago, he convinced me to enroll in the Couple and Family Therapy program, even though I was planning on being a counselor. He conducted my admissions interview. He was my advisor when I was a student. He taught several of the courses I took during my master's. After graduation, he hired me as an instructor. He taught me how to teach. He supervised my private practice. He referred clients to me. He mentored me. He even gave me his office to use, which was, very generous. He pushed me to advance my career. Later still, he supervised my supervision of supervisees. That's a confusing thing to say, but yeah, he supervised my supervision of supervisees. He even gave me tax advice and has saved me probably thousands of dollars from his good tax advice. But most of all, I consider Paul to be my close friend, a friend who has always been there for me, who has listened to me when I was suffering, and who has always believed in me. So in closing, I have just one question of Paul. I want to ask you one question. Will the stress of being chair make me bald like you?
That's a difficult question to answer because it involves genetics, but I'm guessing you don't have those genetic predispositions like I have. It's a recessive gene carried by the males, and from what I can see of what I know of your family and your family pictures, that ain't one of the predispositions.
But no one in my family has been chair of the Couple and Family Therapy program.
That's true. It could be a stressor that no one has ever had to deal with, and there is always the outside possibility that you will be hirsute in the way I am.
Well, I've been chair for let's see, about 51 days. And I can tell you that I can imagine my hair falling out.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the stress of the program, I mean, just to go into a little bit of that, we're in charge of 150 odd students. We're going to have 6 full-time instructors and 10 to 20 adjunct instructors teaching many, many classes a quarter. I think I did a tally, and it's something like 20 to 30 classes a quarter. Does that sound about right?
Right, yeah.
And we have at any given time like 60, 70 students at internship, 50-ish students that are in 50 different agencies around the region, and some in Canada and other states and Texas. And we have licensing issues, and of course, not every student is going to be smooth sailing, and we have to deal with the choppy waters with students sometimes.
Right.
And then we have upper management, and we have union issues, and we have meetings, and we have budgets, and we have to fire people and hire people, and we have to, it's just a lot to do. And so I could imagine my hair falling out.
Well, I get that, but you have the disposition and the understanding and the motivation to take those different stratas that you've been mentioning and make them work together for the program, for the students, and for the faculty. And while there's a lot of moving parts, I think the big thing is making sure those parts are in synchronization. So I would say I have a lot of confidence that that synchronization will take place, even though it might worry you a lot. But the job has a lot of moving parts, and there's reason to be concerned. But my experience is that if you get the right sequencing going with the different parts, that while there's a lot of multiplicity out there, it pretty much works, and nobody actually falls off a cliff, or no disasters really happen. And you pick up the pieces as some of the subsections don't work as well as they might, and you get through the day.
Yeah, the single thing that I think about, and I have been thinking about since I became full-time 6 years ago, is the knowledge that I can trust my coworkers and my bosses to understand when I make a mistake, if I make a mistake, that I'm not going to be immediately, canned or criticized or judged. We all make mistakes, and that you just do what you can and you move forward.
Yeah, right. And you have good leadership, so I mean they understand that they make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's being having a certain amount of perspective that you derive from the mistake and then moving on.
So I have some empirical data demonstrating how awesome you are. Did you know that I had data?
No.
Yeah, I have empirical data demonstrating how awesome you are. So first off, you won the WAMFT, that's the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. You won the WAMFT Educator of the Year Award a couple years ago.
Yep.
So that's hard data right there.
Yep.
I just want to point out you won it after I won it.
Okay, right.
But, just saying, you won that award. Another thing, according to reports in 2013 and 2014, on average, your students rate you a 5.7 on a scale from 1 to 6. This means that most of your students consider you to be a quote-unquote excellent professor. So again, we ask students to rate you in your classes on a scale from 1 to 6, and your students, on average, this is average, your average score in 13 and 14 was a 5.7. That is very close to being a perfect score of 6.0.
Well, it sounds awesome.
So your students love you.
Okay.
That's data right there. And if that doesn't tell you how awesome you are, I don't know what does, right? I mean, that's what we strive for, is student satisfaction.
Yeah. Have we looked at the 2015 scores yet?
I'm sure they're similar, actually.
Okay.
I have looked at those numbers, actually.
Okay.
Another data point here, 100% of alumni from our 2015 alumni survey, 100% of alumni indicate they are glad they chose the program. 100%.
That is an amazing statistic, but that's of course reflects all of the faculty and staff, not just me.
But you're the top of the heap, and you set the tone, and you hire all these people, and everything flows down from you. So another data point from the same report, alumni survey report from 2015 that I just wrote recently. 98% of alumni are currently working in the CFT field. 98% of our alumni from this survey indicated that they are currently working in the field of couple and family therapy.
Again, that's awesome.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
How many programs can claim that statistic that many of their alumni are actually working in the field? Another data point, most employers out there in the field, so on-site, agencies, places that are not Antioch, most employers of our graduates rate Antioch University student graduates as quote-unquote more competent than graduates from other programs.
I like that statistic.
Why?
Well, because we're obviously in an educational marketplace that's very competitive, and the more our students are preferred by employers tells us that we are doing our job, and we are preparing them for the complex job that they have to do, and that will bring us more students and in turn ensure the viability of our program.
Yeah. I added this question recently to the survey that we send out to these agencies asking them about our interns and our graduates. And I didn't know what they were going to say. I had the question is, are our graduates less competent, the same competent, or more competent than graduates from other programs? What's your opinion? And I was like, God knows I don't know what they're going to say. I just no idea what these people don't work for us. They might have gone to different schools in the area. It's like, God knows. But most of them, I don't know, something like 60, 70% or something, indicated that our graduates are more competent. And then the rest of them said the same competency. So, and I don't know if anyone said they were less competent. So, but again, most employers rate Antioch grads as more competent than graduates from other programs. That's a big deal. It's
very big.
So let's go into your life a little bit. Do you mind talking about your life?
No, go ahead.
So what do you want to say regarding, I don't know, just your childhood and your upbringing?
Well, I grew up in Blessed Sacrament Parish in the north end of Seattle, off of 45th Avenue Northeast.
What parish?
Blessed Sacrament Parish. It's a Catholic school parish, and I attended kindergarten through grade school there.
Where was it?
And it was in the University District area.
Oh, okay.
And had a very warm and consistent level of support through that community. Played all the sports in the Catholic youth organization called the CYO League.
Like what?
Basketball, baseball, football.
What position did you play in football?
Football, I played different positions. I was big as a child, and so I played the more beefier roles from quarterback to tackle. And basketball, I was the center. I was 5'9" in the 8th grade. I was the tallest kid in the school.
You played quarterback?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was big and had an arm.
Yeah.
And then then I played baseball. I played shortstop. I was a left-handed shortstop, which was always interesting because you don't quite, because of the mechanics there, it's a little more difficult to get the ball to first. But I had good hands, and had a good coach, and so I played shortstop.
It's interesting because I'm not left-handed, but I played shortstop. I played football and basket, and I was also center. Because I was tall. I'm not tall now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm tall-ish, but I'm not.
Yeah, I was just adolescent. I just matured a little earlier, and so I was bigger than the average.
Right. And
never changed after that, though.
Gets to be center. Yeah, I'm a little surprised because how tall are you now?
5'9".
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I'm 6 foot. You could see me being tall early, but
I bottomed out at 5'9".
So you grew up in the U District, and you're going to this Catholic school, and you played a lot of sports, and you were a jock. If we went back to your, what would it be now, like your 40th reunion, 40th high school reunion, would people say, "Oh yeah, he was the jock"?
Yeah, I wasn't a particularly good student. I wasn't particularly interested in school, and so when I went to prep school, my parents moved to Capitol Hill, and I went to Seattle Prep, which was a Jesuit school. The school before that at Blessed Sacrament was Dominicans, and both the Dominicans and the Jesuits were fairly fierce educators, particularly the Jesuits, as they're known for. But I didn't particularly. I wasn't particularly interested in academics. And to some extent, I'm very grateful that the Jesuits would not allow me to fail academically. They insisted that I do well, despite my interest in sports and not really being interested in learning. So they kind of kept me in the game. And I'll be forever grateful for them for doing that, because I think maybe in other circumstances I would have not had the later opportunities, because I would not have developed the basic skills that they insisted on. I had a classics education at prep school where you had to take Latin and Greek and all the different maths, algebra and calculus, etc., which again I did not excel at, and but they kept me in the game. So that was kind of an important early learning experience.
Did that influence your decision to become an educator?
I wasn't really interested in education, so that didn't take place till much later in my career.
You were the oldest of several, a typical Catholic family with lots of kids.
Yep, I was oldest of 5, and
did you have hair back then?
I had hair, yes. I didn't, but I interesting enough, when I was about 21. That's when I lost most of my hair, and at the time I thought it was cool because I could get into bars early, but I didn't think it was so cool after I was 22 and didn't have much. I felt like my days of being a good-looking guy were over.
So what year was this when you graduated from high school?
I graduated from high school in 1964.
64. So Beatlemania was at its height.
Yep, right.
Were you into the Beatles?
I wasn't particularly, but yeah, it was a bit. Obviously, it was part of the culture. I was the '60s were just coming into power, and I was very interested in the things that were taking place in San Francisco. Across the country, I started reading more alternative literatures and alternative philosophies. Like a lot of people at the time, was interested in things, people like Jean-Paul Sartre and existentialism, because it seemed to be counterculture, and I sort of backed into a more intellectual interest in that time. I went to Seattle University, and I majored in
another Catholic school, another Jesuit school,
another Catholic Jesuit school.
And you were just Jesuited all up in your childhood.
Yeah, and I majored in philosophy and social sciences. I had no idea where I was going, like most of my fellow students, and grew weary of the Catholic culture I was growing up in. Not that it wasn't rigorous, not that it wasn't valuable, but I felt very confined, and this is the 60s, and I was wanting to break out. And so I got so tired of school, and I was so basically lost in terms of what I wanted to do, I dropped out. And I went into the Domestic Peace Corps Vista, and that's what changed my life.
You dropped out in what year?
My sophomore year.
Sophomore year, because you were disillusioned.
Totally. I was completely disillusioned. And of course, if you go back to that time, it was a time of disillusionment with the existing social norms, existing political structures.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be part of the social change that was going on, and I thought that the best way to do that was joining Vista. Also, though, to be totally honest, by being in Vista, you also had a draft deferment. Remember, the Vietnam War is raging,
yeah.
And if you dropped out of school, if you were in school, you had a deferment. If you dropped out of school, you didn't have a deferment. But if you went into Vista or something like that, like the Peace Corps, they gave you a deferment. So I was doing something to be part of social change, but I was also doing it, so joining something where I would also not be drafted.
Yeah, when I talk to people from your generation, they all have a story like that. Like, I pretty much went to college so I wouldn't get drafted, or right. I had to have kids really quickly because I heard that if you had a kid, you wouldn't be drafted as fast.
Right.
I got married because, there's all these like ways of gaming the system so you don't get drafted.
But I joined a program that was part of the government, and it was a social change program. And so I got the benefit of the protection of the draft, but I was doing things around involving myself in social change. And I ended up going to a school at the University of Colorado that trained us to be community organizers. And then from there I worked for a while in Detroit during the riots there and helped pick up the pieces as a result of the riots. I worked in the inner city there. And then after that was for a couple months. And then after that, I was assigned to an Indian reservation in north central Nevada called the Fallon Paiute Shoshone Indian Reservation. And it was about 60 miles northeast of Reno. And it was in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, that's the middle of nowhere.
It's the middle of nowhere.
So what was it like working there?
It was an amazing experience because it was a different culture, and I was the only white guy there, and I lived there with the people, and I got to learn about myself, and I had an amazing mentor named Del Steve, who was the tribal chairman, and he brought me into his family, and I learned about Native American life. I learned about Native American culture, and I had opportunities to be close to the people in that community, and it taught me about myself and taught me about life in ways that I hadn't ever experienced before. And it was at that point, as a result of that experience, that I came back to school with an idea that learning was important and could make a difference in the world. And I transferred to the University of Washington and completed my last 2 years there.
Husky.
And then as a result of my experience at the university, I got to see what world-class education was like. And one of the more inspirational instructors I had was one of the first people I had, and he was an economics professor, and his name was Douglas North. Douglas North won the Nobel Prize in economics later after he was at the UW. But when I took a course from him, it inspired me because he was a brilliant teacher, and he had an intellect that was second to none. And seeing him operate with the students inspired me to want to be able to teach at that level. Learning just became very, very exciting, and I started eating up ideas, eating up the different talent that was at the UW this was now in the late 60s, early 70s, because I graduated in 71. And the day I graduated, or the month I graduated from the University of Washington, a colleague called me up from the University of Washington and asked me if I wanted to be on the faculty at the University of Oregon. And that was kind of I had known some people in my work in Vista and had done work at the Vista training centers, which were usually at universities. And so my first job after I graduated was I was a lecturer at the University of Oregon in the School of Public Affairs, talking about community development. And that sort of got me on the career path to higher education.
So, Paul, I want to back up. Tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Well, as I said, I grew up in a Catholic large family. I was
Irish Catholic, right?
Irish-German Catholic family. My mom and dad were very motivated. My father was a state legislator as I grew up, and my mom participated in a lot of parish activities. And she had taught chemistry at Seattle University during the war, and so they were, they valued education. But my father actually valued sports over education, and he encouraged me to develop my athletic skills. But I didn't really have. I did okay, but I didn't really have the gifts that would be required to play college sports, and so that was kind of an adjustment actually, because I was so intensely dedicated to playing sports. I thought I could make it at the collegiate level, but I just didn't have the talent. And so part of that adjustment, as I look back, was figuring out, okay, if I'm not going to be an athlete, then what am I going to be? And having kind of not taken my schooling very seriously, I had to kind of figure out things, and basically I sort of bounced around in school without much focus, and didn't really get it until I left, dropped out of college, which I think is a really important thing to do, because if you don't know who you are and you're trying to study without any direction or purpose, it's hard to keep your energy and your focus up. And so it wasn't until after I put some of those things together as a result of my experience in Vista that I had more focus, knew who I was, and knew what I wanted, that when I went to the UW, it was a great opportunity for me to then I became a straight A student.
Yeah, I had a similar crisis as you did during my time. I was at University of Washington as well, and during my sophomore, junior years, I almost quit. I almost dropped out. Not because I hated it or I wasn't doing well. It was just I just didn't see the point.
Right.
And but I'm really glad that I stuck it out, because when I did see the point later on, when I wanted to become a therapist, in order to apply to a master's program, you needed a bachelor's degree, literally in anything. And I had that, and so I was happy about that. So okay, let's get back to your story here. So you after University of Washington, then what'd you do?
Well, I got a job as I said, I got a job at the University of Oregon teaching in the public affairs department. Worked there, and then same kind of thing. Someone called me up after about a year there and asked me about a job at Western Washington University and would I be interested in that. And so I left the University of Oregon and went to Bellingham and taught at in a new program that was integrating the social studies, and there was a federal grant called University Year for Action, and we got a $750,000 grant to see if we could integrate the social sciences and make those programs more relevant to the surrounding community, and particularly addressing problems of poverty and injustices that were taking place. So, for example, we had the sociology department, the psychology department, and political science department and the School of Minority Studies all participating and offering classes that were relevant to students who were joining this University for Action program to apply the social sciences to issues of social change, in this case to the Bellingham community. And it was kind of like a mini Vista program, actually, but but the people in the program, unlike Vista, were actually going to school while they were doing and engaging in social change projects.
So then what?
So then one of the guys who was the central, his name was Dean Elias, who was one of the central people in the University for Action project at Western, left Western and started a program through Antioch College that was beginning to spread across the United States. And he set up a graduate program in Seattle. And in 1975, he started this program, and so I left Western and went down to Seattle and basically started involving myself in this new program at Antioch University.
Let me figure this out. Okay, I didn't know this. So Antioch College, which is in Ohio,
right,
and had been around since 1852,
right,
and
founded by Horace Mann,
and it's a progressive social justice university or college at the time.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, Antioch College was creating branches in other cities. Is that
correct?
What you're saying?
Yeah, all over the United States, actually.
And it was like a kind of, because it doesn't sound like a normal thing for a college to do, to just be like, let's have various different campuses around the country that are run by other people.
Right. So it was the idea of spreading progressive education throughout the United States, and so Antioch at that time was a progressive leader in progressive education, and this was one of their attempts to spread the word, as it were.
How did they get in contact with your dean?
Well, he knew some people. He was always connected to. He had his pulse on a lot of different social change projects, and he had a organization called Northwest Social Systems that was consulting with a wide range of educational institutions, and so he had his hand on the pulse and knew some of the people at Antioch, and then he decided to start a center as a result of his connections with the people in Ohio, and there was an effort to set up centers in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Hawaii, and all the centers in those areas all spurted up, and Dean invited me to come down to the Seattle Center because we had an ongoing relationship, and that's where Antioch first started, the Bridgeway in the Upper Fremont area. And from there, they eventually went to Capitol Hill, and then from Capitol Hill, they went down to Lake Union, and then from Lake Union, 2nd Avenue, and then they went from 2nd Avenue to 6th Avenue. So there's different locations that was growing. But when I came down from Bellingham, they were in this little office building that we both shared with the Human Services Program and Antioch, and that's how I knew all the faculty, I knew all the people, and then eventually I left Western and started up with Antioch.
So while you were still working at Western as an instructor in social science, it's called
the Human Services Program. It's a social sciences program.
Okay. Yeah. And you're teaching bachelor's level people about social justice and this sort of thing. And your boss at the time, is he like your boss?
Well, no, my bosses are at Western Washington University.
Yeah. But he left Western, right?
But he's doing Antioch, I'm doing Western. We're doing kind of like parallel programs, but he's doing a graduate program in psychology. Now, at that time, I had no master's degree, so I've been teaching for those years in undergraduates without a master's degree. And so when I got connected with Antioch, I actually, in 1976, started the master's program there.
It all sounds so weird to me because, it's so, I don't know, it's so 70s, I guess, to me.
It was much looser.
Yeah, so loose, because this guy's, Antioch College is like, hey, let's start branches in other cities. Yeah. And then this guy, Dean, says, yeah, I'll start that branch. And he just volunteers and says, okay, I'm starting an Antioch. What was it called back then? Antioch College Seattle? It
was actually called Antioch. It was part of a consortium of schools in the West, and it was part of was called Antioch West.
Antioch West.
And then there was Antioch West Seattle, Antioch West San Francisco, Antioch West LA, Antioch West Santa Barbara, Antioch West Hawaii.
Interesting. Some of those still exist. The Hawaii branch doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And the San Francisco branch doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So he starts up this branch, and he's starting a master's in psychology.
Right.
To teach counselors.
No. It had nothing to do with counseling per se. So if you go back to the mid-1970s, his idea was a radical one, and it was part of the Antioch Progressive Education, and that is to make the student in charge of the learning process. And so the student, the curriculum then was 60 credits, quarter credits, and it was there were 3 classes that everybody had to take, and then there were 8 constituting 18 credits, and then all the rest of the curriculum was self-designed. And so you had a committee, and you developed your interest in psychology, and whatever that would be was what you could do. You could do anything you wanted.
So some people could become counselors.
Yes, and I would say maybe half were interested in becoming counselors, and the other half were just doing what they thought were interesting work in psychology. Like they might be interested in somatic psychology or spiritual psychology or psychology that focused on dreams. Or
it's so hippie. It's so 70s.
Very hippie.
And you saw this and you thought, hey, I want to get my master's.
Well, I needed to get my master's because I've been teaching by then.
So you got your master's to excel in education.
I actually got my master's in designing graduate learning programs in psychology.
You designed a program specifically around designing programs in psychology.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea about this.
So actually, when it comes to the family therapy program here at Antioch, I had done a lot of work in program design and educational development that prepared me for that task.
Interesting. So what do you remember about getting that master's? That would have been, what, 70?
I got a master's. It's between 76 and 77. I got my master's in 77. It was a 2-year master's. And I was working at Western during that time teaching in the Human Services Program. I was the deputy director of that program. And the master's program, my individualized design focused on developing graduate education programs for people who wanted to be in helping relationships.
What building was it in at the time? I thought it was on Queen Anne.
No.
It was never on Queen Anne.
Never on Queen Anne.
I thought there was a Queen Anne brand office.
No.
So where was the building at this time?
It was on, by the time it started on Bridgeway.
Yeah, in Fremont.
And then a year later it moved to an old facility that's still there on Capitol Hill that was rented from SMHI, Seattle Mental Health.
And where is that?
And that was up on Capitol Hill off of 15th Avenue East.
And so paint me a picture here, because back then I'm guessing it was like 20 hippies in a room.
Well, it would be, they'd have these, it would be this old mansion that was...
It was old mansion.
An old mansion that was sort of...
That's what I think of.
It was a colonial mansion because it had the big pillars outside like you might see in
like a frat house
in the South or in a frat house, yeah. And, it had
so you just
largely
renovated.
Big empty rooms with 20-foot ceilings, and then people would have bean bags to sit in.
Bean bags.
Yeah, I mean, if that helps you picture kind of how.
Yeah. I'm thinking long hair.
A lot of long hair.
But you had already lost your hair.
I'd lost my hair, but a lot of other people had long hair.
And groovy clothes.
Groovy clothes, definitely.
And did people smoke weed during class?
No, they did not.
Oh, was there like encounter groups or like?
There was, more interested in radical psychology.
So like anti the man.
Yeah, you could say that.
And no chalkboards.
There were chalkboards, but not like you would think in a conventional classroom.
So you would sit around in a circle.
Yeah.
And how big were the classes?
The classes were all small. They were in like they are now, in the 10 to 20 range of people. But then probably more in the 10 to 15 because it was small.
Okay.
The first group there in 1975, there were about 20 students in the entire program.
Those students must have been taking quite a leap, joining a little branch of a little college that had never existed before.
Yeah. The idea was for Antioch, and it was believed that it could, through this process, change psychology.
So you really wanted to change the face of psychology to be more social justice minded, less stuffy, more
humanistic.
More humanistic.
I mean, it was definitely the if you could classify the mood and the shift, it was moving from more behavioral analytical psychology to more humanistic psychology and to more forms of psychology that were expressive and were cathartic.
Rogers, Maslow, these kinds of people talking about like feelings and valuing humans and not pathologizing them.
But it was also embracing people like Wilhelm Reich in the more somatic psychologies or
Fritz Perls, maybe.
Fritz Perls in the more Gestalt, more expressive. A wide range of things that were coming online. I mean, they were all embraced. Eastern psychology, transpersonal, a lot of transpersonal interest in things like Assagioli's spiritual psychology and things like that.
So the market at the time in the region was probably dominated by the University of Washington's.
Yeah, very conventional things. So as you can imagine, this appealed.
Because they're still very conventional now.
Still very conventional, but you can imagine how radical. Yeah. Oh, you only have to take 3 courses. All the rest you can basically create yourself. You get to design it. You'd have a committee that would oversee you of people who were experts in that area. It was kind of like like designing a doctoral degree that existed at Oxford, except you were getting a master's degree and you got to have your own tutors, you got to have your own focus, and you were in charge of your own committee.
The beginning of the me generation.
It wasn't the beginning, but it was, part of it. Yeah, very, very, very centered around the student, which was embraced in the concept of andragogy. Andragogy means the teaching of adults, and if you have an undergraduate approach to adult learning, the adult learner is the center. It's the teacher is at the center. The learner is the center.
Right. When we're in the 3rd grade, children don't dictate their curriculum traditionally.
Known as a pedagogical set of values.
And whereas when you treat adults like adults, you say, well, you're an adult. Think about what you think you should know.
Right.
So there you are in your bean bags, and everyone else has long hair, and they're smoking reefer after class, but not during class. And you're putting your program together, and you're trying to educate yourself on how to build a program, because I'm guessing you have aspirations of building your own program.
No, never had any aspirations like that, but I did have, I was very interested in what designs facilitated learnings for adults, and I joined and started running Dean's company called Northwest Social Systems. And we were a consulting firm, and we helped organizations do continuing education projects and help them learning programs for their employees that moved them in the direction that the organization wanted its employees to go.
So at this point, you're still not thinking about being a counselor or a therapist?
It's starting to loom in there because basically what's happening is we're dealing with learning and organizational systems. And as I started working with them and started embracing more of systems theory, I started getting more interested in thinking about families and how families were systems. And then it's not too far of a step to move in the direction that, well, if you are looking at how dysfunction exists in organizations, that dysfunction somewhat has to do with the way in which people grew up and are perpetuating those dysfunctions in their organizational life. So why not go back to more of the roots of their own family life and look at those things, and then become more interested in doing family. And so eventually my master's degree was used to obtain what's called certification in the state of Washington that I could be a family therapist.
So back then, the licensure certification...
Well, there wasn't any.
Yeah, there wasn't any.
No.
Well, but you mentioned...
I mean, you're either a psychologist or you were a licensed social worker, but there were counselors and family therapists were not licensed or recognized.
And so...
By the state.
You became state certified in...
Well, as a mental health counselor.
You became state certified as a mental health counselor.
Yeah, because the family certification didn't exist.
Yeah, and that gave you the legal ability to practice as a therapist, as a counselor.
During that time, you could do that with or without the certification. It just meant you had the state's imprimatur.
I see. So people could become, and I'm reminded of this. You could be a psychoanalyst. You could be
anything you wanted.
You could be anything you wanted. There was no regulation.
No regulation, right?
Yeah.
Now, but if you wanted more, you wanted to say you had courses or you've completed certain things that the state recognized as appropriate for that level of expertise, then you could go through the process of certification, which would perhaps give more credibility to the practitioner. So at the master's level, there was already a psychologist licensing, and there was no social work licensing because they had it set up so that social workers could practice if they were supervised by psychologists, and so there was a whole network that was in hospitals and different helping psychiatric facilities where the social workers worked hand in hand with psychologists. So that form of credentialing was pretty well managed already.
Huh. That makes a lot of sense that University of Washington has a psychology degree and a social work degree.
Right.
It's like because it goes back that far.
And they never, they've stayed out of the counselor education and the family therapy education business.
And at the time, in the 70s, there were no other programs in the area that could educate you as a counselor?
Oh, no, there were all kinds of programs. Antioch was the University of Washington never got involved because it defined itself as a research institution. But there were programs emerging all over the place like Antioch's program. Antioch was one of a number of programs where experimental programs in the areas of psychology and counseling were emerging.
And at the time, so there's Antioch West, and there was Antioch East, I'm guessing, Antioch Central, maybe.
Right.
Antioch, yeah.
And that would actually, my degree is from Antioch College West.
And that's what it says.
It actually says, it doesn't say from Antioch, it doesn't say Antioch, Seattle, it says Antioch College West.
The other thing I've noticed about the diplomas, because I've seen your diploma in your office, is that diplomas were small back then.
Yeah.
And then my master's degree that I got 20 years ago-ish is a little bigger, and then my doctorate degree is even bigger. So I'm guessing in 50 years they'll be like poster size.
Yeah, they probably will be, yeah.
Okay, so how many branches around the United States were there?
I think there were about 20.
20, and now there's 5.
It's contracted significantly, yes, because it wasn't sustainable at the level that they had.
Well, the different branches just went out of business.
Yeah, right.
Because they didn't survive.
Right.
Yeah. So you become a mental health counselor?
Yep.
And then you start working as a counselor?
Well, but my interest was always family therapy, so I certainly saw individuals, but I was focused on working with families and family and problems that related to families, like eating disorders, like drug use.
So you started taking clients in private practice.
Right.
And did you start teaching at Antioch right away?
I started teaching at Antioch in 1978.
So right away.
Yeah.
So right after you graduate, 77.
Yeah, right. You'll notice there's a pattern there. I fall into these jobs where pretty much after I get my degree, or even before I have my degree, I'm at the so-called level you're supposed to have it. I'm already doing it.
Right. So in 78, you start teaching as an
adjunct.
One of the first teachers at Antioch, West Seattle.
Well, there were a bunch of other instructors there. I was the one, but I was primarily interested in. Yeah, I guess you're right.
75.
Actually. Yeah, right. 75, 70. Yeah, by 77, I guess I am one of the first. You're right.
Yeah.
I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah, I didn't know that about you, actually. So you're and you knew the founder. You kind of came with him.
Yeah, Dean Elias was one of my mentors. So
his picture's downstairs.
Yeah, right. He did something like.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
Doesn't he come to events sometimes?
He comes once in a while, but he's teaching at St. Mary's University in San Francisco, and he's in the education department there.
Yeah.
But he did something with me that was like what I did with you. I mean, he mentored me through all this process, and it's not unlike what I did with you. Although I was more hands-on with you than he was with me, but he always helped me and, opened doors for me and supported me way before I had credentials or... Huh. So there is a.
So Dean's like my grand mentor.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes, he is your grand.
Star Wars fans, you're Obi-Wan. I'm Luke, and Dean is Qui-Gon Jinn.
You could put it in those terms, yeah.
Okay, so
you're learning something here.
I am.
You're wondering about your genealogy.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn this, and I'm excited for the listeners to learn this and the students, because I think it's fascinating. It's just so fascinating to think about these progressive go-getters just saying, yep, I'm going to start my own university. Yep. I'm going to start my own program. And you're like, yep, I'm going to become a counselor, and I'm going to start teaching family therapy, even though no one else is doing it.
Well, remember your story, though. You're talking about me supporting you as you evolved, and you didn't have the experience or the credentials, but you had someone believing in you and how important that was. Well, Dean did the same thing with me. And you're going to do the same thing with your students.
Who will be the next?
So it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. Who will be the next person?
Yeah.
Because our ages kind of match up too in some ways, in terms of like when you became chair and all that kind of stuff. But so let's get into that. So you become a counselor. You start seeing private clients. You start wanting to work with families a lot. You're interested in systems theory, which was kind of the wave at the time, right?
Yeah.
It was moving away from looking at individuals.
Right. Family therapy is part of the 70s where it was iconoclastic, and new ideas were all over the place, and family systems was an idea that says basically stop getting caught up in looking at just what goes on with individual experience. Don't get that analytical psychology had overemphasized the role that individual development influences individuals, and started emphasizing, well, yeah, but it's not just the individual, it's the system they're in, and you have to, if you really want to make change, you have to change the system. And as a matter of fact, it's easier to change the system than it is to change the individual, because the system has such a huge impact on individual behavior.
Agreed. So all the big names are starting to become famous at that time. Satir, Mnuchin. Was Bowen becoming big?
Yeah, but remember, Satir is from Tacoma.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
She was local.
She was considered a local.
Yeah.
I didn't even know she was.
And she influenced all kinds of people. One of those was another mentor of mine, Dan Kelleher, where, he had personal contact, and he worked with her and trained with her, and then Dan helped me and he supervised me and had an influence over me. And Dan Kelleher ended up on the faculty here at Antioch too, as well. So there's all these connections of these systems people, and the most prominent is Virginia Satir.
Yeah, I just showed videos of her work in my applied family therapy class this last Tuesday, which I like to do, and there's a universal, there's a lot of reactions from students today, because they have a very, shall we say, limited understanding of what's possible in family therapy or therapy in general. And when they see Virginia moving people around and putting her hand on people's shoulders and really, being super warm and getting in people's faces and in a good way, in a nice way. And when they see that, they all gasp because to them, it's unethical. It's crossing boundaries. And maybe it is, but at the time in the 70s, anything went, so to speak. You had Fritz Perls, you had Virginia Satir, you had Haley, you had the strategic people. And, and I feel like today, and this is one of the things I try to get across to the students, and I don't think I'm effective at doing it, but I really try to get across that family therapists, we come from a legacy of very weird people that got away with doing a lot of weird things in a good way. They did a lot of weird things to good effect with people, and that we have a lot of leeway and we have a lot of range in terms of what's possible to us. We don't have to just sit there and quietly talk about cognitions all day.
Right. Well, the whole point of family therapy is that it came out of a culture where it was trying to resist and change the norms about what worked and what didn't work. And because it came out of that context of being more iconoclastic, the ideas and the interventions were more unconventional. And the idea was to shake up the system. Right. And so it was way more acceptable to do things that were out of the norm. And the whole point at one level of the systems thinking is step out of the box. If you don't step out of the box, you can't get the client to step out of the box. If you can't get them to step out of the box, they stay stuck in their narratives and they can't change. So the whole idea was having a change agent who was more unconventional to shake up and to create a certain amount of disruption in the way in which business was being conducted.
To perturb the system.
Yes, and so, a lot of the people who became famous were people who were really good at that, like Virginia Satir, like Salvador Minuchin, like Milton Erickson. These people were... Whitaker were fundamentally very weird people. But they were very good, though, at shaking up the system.
A student was doing a role play on Tuesday after I was really trying to get across that it's okay in class, particularly because you're not going to screw anything up because these aren't real clients. They're just your classmates role playing a family, to really go for it, And a student really went for it and acted, quite strange. And I thought it was actually a good session. And so I gave her the Whitaker Award, and she was ecstatic that she won the Whitaker, even though I just kind of brought that up off the top of my head. Yeah. But yeah, it can be quite liberating, and I think it appeals to a certain kind of person, and it certainly appeals to me because I like being weird in that way. I don't like following convention. I want to see how to step outside of our cultural appropriate quote unquote behavior and see what else is possible. And the 70s was all about that. Humanistic psychology was about that, and family therapy was about that. They were pushing against very stuffy traditional psychoanalytic. They were pushing back against Skinner and behaviorism. They were pushing back against Beck and cognitivism, and they were pushing back against the man and against their parents. And we had the baby boomers, and they were going to rule the world. And you were a part of that group.
Yep.
That's pretty exciting. I feel like those kinds of things will never happen again. I'm really jealous. I wish I grew up during your time because it sounds like a lot more fun.
Yeah, it was fun, but
because just think about it. When you were at that age, that's what it was like for you.
Yeah.
I was in the 80s. I was with Reagan.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot different by the time I was, of that age,
Well, yeah, but don't forget who preceded Reagan.
Nixon?
Yeah.
Yeah, but at least you had a group of people that were fighting against it. When Reagan was in power, very few people fought it. There was the punks, but they were very marginalized. But you had a whole generation that hated him.
Right.
And
Nixon, to be fair to him, he was responsible for a lot of progressive social legislation. I mean, not him directly, but his administration was. And so...
But the way that it felt in the 70s, you had riot. I mean, when I went to the University of Washington, I was walking through this building one time, and I asked a this person. I was like, this building is designed very strangely. Why is it? There's like weird doors that don't really look like they fit. And they said, well, actually, this was built in the 70s when there were regular riots on campus. Mm-hmm. And so this building is set up so that if someone presses a button, all the doors swing shut and lock. And if there's a riot happening in one section of the building, it's contained to just that floor and
like a prison.
Yeah, it's like everything just shuts down, and there are secret doors that lead out in case you need to get out of the building that only that you can't really see from the outside. Mm-hmm. And even though that sounds terrifying, it also sounds very exciting in a way that we just haven't experienced in Seattle since.
Well, so the exciting part was, of course, believing in change, being committed to it, and being willing to shake up the system to institute the change. The downside, though, was there was over-optimism about what could really change, and a lot of people did a lot of screaming and yelling that really didn't produce anything, except gave them a cathartic moment.
Because there were a lot of encounter groups, therapy groups, primal screaming of like, we're going to change, we're going to revolutionize everything, and then the 80s happened.
Yeah.
Then they all got jobs and they became conservative people. Yeah. Okay. So now you're a therapist, you're a counselor, you're moving into family therapy, and you started teaching as an adjunct in the Master's in Psychology program under the mentorship of Dean. What's his name?
Elias, and he's managing the university. So there are many other programs besides. There's a psychology program which has always remained the largest program at Antioch, but there were other programs that were more geared towards the social change aspects, and there was a degree in education, there was a degree in whole systems design, and there was a degree in psychology, and they all were self-designed degrees with committees, and the psych folks, more than the other folks, well, basically were looking to provide a different approach to psychology and radicalize psychology in different ways, but they were all doing it. Most people were doing it from the point of view of trying to usher in new clinical approaches. And still the case today, but the thing that changed everything was the state Department of Health starting to license mental health workers like they did psychologists.
When did they start doing that?
Well, what happened? Well, that happened in the 80s, and what essentially was taking place is that there was a call for more regulation
from the public.
Yeah, well, or really, actually,
maybe from other professionals.
It was complicated because remember, during that time, managed care is ushered in, and managed care is the idea we provide insurance, but we would do so where the insurance company would take a more active role in deciding, like limiting the type of sessions, monitoring the type of care that was being provided to supposedly upgrade it. And the other part was that they started wanting to keep the cost of healthcare down because the cost of healthcare is rising significantly as more insurance programs come online and more employers insure their people and more therapists are providing them. There's a call for more managed care. And with managed care, this is a big, big thing. Then the idea is let's have master's level people provide the care because we can do that at a much cheaper way. And much of this didn't require licensed psychologists. That was a revolution.
So in the 80s, you have insurance companies paying out a lot of dollars to just any old therapist, one. And two, they're paying psychologists who are charging a lot of money, and they're thinking how they're going to save money and help regulate what product that they're giving to the patients. Right. So they think, well, let's try to push for regulation of certification or licensure. Right. And also let's start moving clients away from doctoral level people, psychiatrists and psychologists, to move them towards master's level people, because master's level people, we don't have to pay as much.
Correct. And so that was a boon for Antioch, but it also changed the entire way in which Antioch's master's degrees in counseling were being offered, because it started basically saying, unless you have X, Y, and Z coursework, you can't practice. And so that had a profound effect on the curriculum at Antioch, Antioch's curriculum.
And this was happening around
in the late 80s.
This was happening around the country too, right?
Yeah, right. In the late 80s, the curriculum had to completely change to conform with the licensing requirements of the Department of Health. And when it did that, it moved from a more alternative way of looking at a master's degree to basically a more standardized clinical training curriculum, which made it, by definition, more conventional.
Right. So instead of you can design all your own classes and you're a special snowflake, it's you got to conform to the state's requirements.
Right. You got to take psychodiagnostics, psychopathology. You've got
welcome to the Reagan era.
Right.
And
that changed everything, and it changed the Antioch curriculum.
So that's interesting because there were the other programs like the whole systems design.
Right. They didn't change.
They didn't change because they didn't have to.
No.
Because they weren't dealing with a certification issue.
Right.
And so psychology now becomes quite buttoned up and a little uptight compared to the way it used to be in the 70s.
Right.
Interesting. And so you're teaching in this time.
Right.
Still as an adjunct?
Yep.
And practicing?
No. In let me think here.
85.
85, I become, a
full-time.
Full-time core faculty member.
And back then there was just a certification in mental health counseling?
Yes.
Not in marriage and family therapy?
No.
So, okay, very interesting. And this is why you still have a license in mental health counseling, is my guess.
Right. That was my primary license.
Yeah, because that's all that was. That was all that you could have back then.
Right.
Because you have a license in mental health counseling and a license in marriage and family therapy.
Right.
Interesting. I always wondered why you had both.
Yeah.
But it's because originally, and you've just kept it because why not?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Okay. So then what? So you become core faculty. How many other core faculty are there?
There, I think there's about 8 of us
in the counseling. That's pretty big.
In the mental health counseling. Yeah, there were more core faculty then.
And it sounds like that you had a lot of students then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we had a fair number.
A few hundred students?
The census for the psych program has actually stayed fairly stable, but in the I think the late 80s, it jumped a fair amount with the credentialing that took place, because then, in effect, there was a set of criteria you had to meet, and then certain programs provided that criteria, and there was more of an interest in the counseling field. So in the late 80s, the enrollments bumped quite a bit up, and then there were increasing number of people at that point who were interested in family therapy, and I was always interested in family therapy. So after we moved into the early 90s, I started talking about having a curriculum that would meet the standards for the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, and started talking that up. And there were a number of people on the faculty who were also interested in family therapy. And I think in 1994, we did a proposal that we have a family therapy curriculum separate from the counseling curriculum. And that led to curriculum design, and that's where my curriculum design stuff and my work in for my master's degree came into play. We developed a committee of other family therapists in town, and they developed some recommendations, and we put forth the curriculum, and it was passed by the Planning Council. And then eventually in 1996, the Commission for Accreditation of Marriage and Family Therapy Education Programs came to Seattle and certified our program as meeting the minimum standards for training marriage and family therapists, and we became what's called a professionally accredited program. That idea of having accreditation was integral to the success of the program.
Yeah, okay. So backing up a little bit, so you're in the 80s and there's this government regulation saying, unless you come from a program that teaches you these subjects and adheres to these criteria, then you can't apply for licensure in the state of Washington as a mental health counselor. And so it bifurcates the programs in the region for those that want to stay progressive and stay against the man, so to speak, and more tailored to individual wants. So there's those programs which is where Antioch came from, to the other programs that decided, well, we're going to go for training students to become certified. So when I started graduate school in the 90s, there were those two different kind of programs. There were the programs that were geared specifically for state certification and programs that were not. Am I correct in this?
Right.
Yeah. So there were programs that said, no, we're going to keep our hippie status. And there were programs that said, nope, we're in the 80s now. We have to become 80s.
Well, and I would say they call it hippie. They'd say they're alternative status.
And which I fully embrace Antioch's continued hippie status to some extent, even though we have to adhere or conform to certain standards so that people can work in the field. But anyway, okay, so then you're like, okay, I want to start my program, and so is that accreditation then by AAMFT at that time?
Yeah.
So it became an accredited program that early.
Yeah.
Interesting. In like 96.
Right.
Interesting. So that's when I joined. I decided to become a therapist while sitting in traffic on 520. That's a highway in Bellevue. And I was working in the business sector, and I was wearing my suit, and I was just like thinking about the rest of my life at the age of 24. And I was just like, is this how I'm going to spend the rest of my life? Just being a suit in a business, Microsoft sort of thing. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so I decided to become a therapist on a whim and applied to Antioch. And then 95, and you were in the process of getting accreditation at the time. And I go to open house, 1995, and you say to all of us at open house, you're like, okay, people that are going to potentially start, it might have even been orientation, I'm not sure. But you're like, okay, everyone, there's two different tracks. You can do the mental health counseling track, or you can do the couple and family therapy track. And in the counseling track, you'll work with individuals and you'll do this sort of thing. And in the couple and family therapy track, you'll also work with individuals, but you'll also work with couples and families. And I had never even heard of such a thing. And I said, whoa, that sounds exciting. Sign me up for that. Little did I know until just recently, like today, that you were just in the beginning process of building that program.
Yeah.
Because at the time, the way that I thought of it, I'm sure you didn't lie, but it certainly came across as though this was an old program that had been around for many years. And it's just interesting to think about me being a part of a program that had just started months earlier.
Well, but to be fair, the counseling curriculum had a very heavy systems orientation. And so a lot of the courses that already existed just were morphed into the family therapy certification requirements. It wasn't like you got there and we just put online all these new courses. A lot of the same courses were still being taught with the systems orientation. There was human development.
So this is really interesting to me because, in our program, in our master's program at Antioch University, Seattle, all the mental health counseling students take systems courses.
Well, right. The systems is a perfect example. That course always had existed in the mental health counseling curriculum.
And it's interesting to learn this history because you would have taught the systems theory class to all the mental health counseling students before there was a family therapy track.
Right. Yeah.
And then once you decided to do a family therapy track, you're like, well, we're already basically teaching them a lot of this stuff anyway. You just have to add a couple things.
Right.
And then it didn't screw things up.
No.
Yeah.
You got it.
And to this day, the mental health counseling students at Antioch are getting some of that family therapy influence from those early days of all that overlap.
Yeah. And what we did was we just got better at calling out what was relevant for both.
Yeah, and it's the same today. For instance, all mental health counseling students and couple and family therapy students in their first quarter take family of origin systems, which is a course you designed, and it has to do with systemic theory and family of origin and family and countertransference and introjects and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting to learn this history because if a counseling program just started from scratch, it wouldn't necessarily involve all that emphasis on systems theory.
No.
Yeah.
Not so typical.
Interesting. Okay. So then I join and I become a student and you've just basically started this track, and then I became certified in 99. I graduated in 97, certified 99, and then licensed later on. So then now you're the big dog because now you're chair of this first program that you designed, the couple and family therapy concentration at the time.
Well, there's also another faculty member, Bill Forshea, who's very active and with me in doing that. We were both AMFT approved supervisors, and we were very involved with marriage and family therapy education. And he played a very active role too.
Just the two of you?
Yep. Okay.
So then what happened with the program?
Well, when you start a new program and the focus is on counseling, anytime you try to make a change, it's hard. And to meet the accreditation standards for AMFT, there were supervision standards that weren't really in place when under the counseling program that made it more costly to implement the marriage and family program, and it was somewhat controversial. But we prevailed and sold the university on the future, and family therapy obviously was a future of a master's level clinical training. And
what do you mean you had to convince who of what?
Well, we had to convince the administrators that the program would be viable and there would be a demand for it and it would succeed because they already had something that worked. Why try something new?
So I'm sure that's just one of the various fights you had to fight in order to get this program off the ground.
Yeah, there was definite foot dragging, if not resistance to moving in this direction. But, it's typical of any university. Universities are very conservative places.
Well, Antioch didn't used to be. It was a beanbag university.
It used to be, but Antioch morphed into just like most institutions where it had a way of doing business and then got used to it. And
they threw away the beanbags and got the office chair.
Yep.
And so then you start hiring hoo-haws like me to become adjuncts.
Yep.
In the marriage and family therapy program, couple and family therapy program. And you still have tons of students, 100 plus students every year or at any given time. And the licensure situation happens in the early 2000 time, and you're still chair of the program.
Yep.
When was the next person that you hired besides Bill to help you out in the couple and family therapy program?
Well, we hired Phil Brown, I don't know if you remember Phil Brown.
Then he's son.
He's son, but those would be two.
Is that it?
Main core faculty people.
Or no, Janice Hoshino.
Janice Hoshino was another person?
Yeah. So for the first 15 years-ish of the program, there were very few CFT faculty. The core full-time faculty.
Right, yeah. A small
group
contingent.
of like 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And now we're hiring a new person right now, and there'll be 7 full-time people.
Right.
You, me, Jerry, Jen, Michelle, right. Danny, Janice, and whoever this.
We have a much more. I mean, the university has gradually moved to a much larger core faculty and less adjunct and associate faculty.
Oh, that's the key.
Yeah. And I pushed that from the beginning, but I think as we became more of the dominant program in the university, we have had more influence and we have more likely to get the resources we needed. And a key element is getting a steady group of players, not a group of changing adjunct players.
Right. Yeah. And for those of you out there, if you don't know, universities would prefer to have just adjuncts because they cost less, and then you can pay less. Full-time core
right.
faculty people.
Nationally, it runs 50-50 now.
50-50 adjunct, 50 full-time.
Yeah.
And so administration, whenever you say, hey, we'd like to hire a core faculty, and you'll save money by paying less adjuncts, but you'll pay more money because you're getting a core faculty. But what you gain with a core faculty person is this person can advise, this person can build the program up, this person can do more administrative duties that are necessary. As the program becomes more and more complicated, frankly, we have to have more full-time people to bear the weight of the administrative side. So now, what's next for your career? Now that you've given me your job, what's next?
Well, to see you flourish, and then I'm going to move into a half-time role starting next year, and I'll teach in a half-time role for the next 3 years after that, and then I don't know what's in store for me. Then I'm writing more now than I have, and
you're still in practice.
Still in practice. Got a bunch of articles that were just published, and so keep the ball rolling.
Do you think about what your legacy will be and how people will remember you at Antioch?
Well, when you gave your introduction, I was thinking about it, but I have to tell you, I don't think of it that way. I don't characteristically think about it that way. It's very satisfying when you talk about all the people I've affected. I have to say, though, I don't particularly think of it that way. But it sounds good.
But the CFT program wouldn't exist if it weren't for you.
Yeah. I'm just saying I don't think of it particularly that way.
And all those family therapists.
So when I listen to you talk about it, it's very, that sounds good. That's powerful. That's cool. But I guess I just don't give myself much opportunity to reflect that way about it. And it sounds very impressive. You make me sound impressive. I guess I'm not impressed with myself.
So
in that way,
you still have self-esteem issues, is what you're saying?
No, I just
non-arrogance issues.
Yeah, but it makes sense what you said.
I mean, if anyone...
It just sounds a little strange.
Well, what you just said earlier, which is like, I guess I was one of the first students. I guess I was one of the first instructors at Antioch.
No.
Well, when you think about naming a wing after someone at a university, you think about people like you that were there at the beginning, that were totally dedicated. You could have gone somewhere else. You could have taught somewhere else. You dedicated your life and blood and sweat to the institution, to the university. You did, extra work to build a brand new program. You headed that program for so many years and led the program and had all those adjuncts and had all those, faculty members and worked hard through many different administrations. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the different presidential administrations that have passed through.
Yeah.
So you're going to go to halftime.
Yep.
And I'm going to become your boss.
Yep.
So watch out.
I will.
Watch yourself.
I will. P's
and Q's.
You were trained by the master.
And so you're going to go halftime for how many years?
3.
So 3 years. So your exit date will be in about 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you'll be done with Antioch.
Well, we'll see. I don't know.
You'll be professor emeritus.
Yeah, probably.
And you'll continue writing.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll come by to meetings.
I don't know if I'll come by to meetings, but they're not that exciting. Come by to gatherings, so.
Well, let me ask you a question. Why are you retiring? I mean, you're not that old.
My wife will be retiring in we're trying to coordinate so we'll both retire about the same time, and so we'll sell our house and scale down. So we're planning on doing this in a cooperative way.
Enjoy life.
And to
because you're a workaholic. You work all the time.
Right.
You're always, technically speaking, this is your off quarter. At Antioch University, Seattle, we get a quarter off so that we can pursue other interests like travel or writing a book or doing research. We're not supposed to be on campus, and yet you're on campus more than anyone else this quarter. This is your off quarter.
Yeah.
So when you retire, you're going to have a lot of free time.
Yeah.
To bother your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can do that pretty well.
So what advice do you have for me?
Well, what I see is you taking the reins. You've completed the draft of our self-study, which is this major document that only 2 people really understand really what's involved in doing that.
You and me.
And it involves you developing an intimate understanding of the underpinnings of the program and the values and the things that need to be done.
And the history now.
Well, the history now, but you've that process that you've just gone through forces you to embrace the program in a completely different way than if you haven't done it. And I know that because I did it myself, and that allows you to own the program.
Right. So every number of years, and 6 years is our current case, we have to become reaccredited by the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. And a major phase of it is you have to write this 200-300-page document in which you study yourself. You write a self-study in which you write about every fine detail of your program. And there's a number of criteria that you have to meet in order to become accredited. And it is such a document. I mean, we're talking 300 pages with tables that have fonts of 7, and fine print that I have to type and you typed, before me on the last one 6 years ago. And so you're right. I have become, you could ask me any question about the program, and sometimes you do, and I can instantly answer it.
Yeah. Well, so that's what I mean by you own it. And now, and also, but it's not only owning it, it actually forces you into, not forces, but it requires you to evolve a vision of the program that it's kind of like doing a doctorate. When you do the study, I'm interested in these ideas, but when you do that, complete that doctorate, it's a little more than being interested in a set of ideas. It's drilling down to, a level of detail and of understanding that doesn't exist outside of the people the people that you know and the other people who've done similar kinds of things. It's very, very in depth. Right. And it requires you to have a vision then of kind of what you're doing and how it can evolve, because you also start seeing like, here's all the stuff that doesn't work. And here's the stuff that, it should work this way and it's not working this way. What are we going to do to make it work that way? And you have embraced all that. And so by doing this, you've educated yourself, but psychologically and emotionally, nobody can match you in terms of having that depth of knowledge, which is going to give you the ability to lead. And, from what I see, you are leading. You are even got into a big fight about me one time about how we should present some aspects of it. And you had a definite idea about it. I had a definite idea, and you stood your ground and you were persistent. This is the way. Anyway, the point I'm making though is that, it's kind of like you have to have a vision and you have to help persuade people to follow that vision, and you have to find people who can implement that vision, and you've got it all. Plus you're smart and you've done all this work, and our students, and you know how to teach. So, I can't think of anything like a greater gift than to see you take the reins.
Well, it is quite a gift to me, and like I said, it's the pinnacle of my career. It's a huge deal.
It's not the pinnacle of your career, by the way.
I think it is.
Well, pinnacle for now, but not for...
Maybe.
I mean, you got lots of other fish to fry.
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I can't imagine anything else happening to me that would be as honorable to me is to become chair of a program. That's a big deal. It's one thing to become an adjunct. It's like I'm a teacher of therapists. It's another thing to become core faculty. You're an administrator. You're a part of the program. It's another thing to become chair of the program. It's like you're in charge of the whole ball of wax.
Right.
And, like you said, your vision drives things, and you lead, and you hire, and you fire, and you deal with the future of everything. I could change things, and I could not change things.
Well, but the point is, I mean, you could go on to be a dean, you could go on to do other things, in programs, and because of the vision that you evolve and your abilities, this is not necessarily the end point. There could be lots of other opportunities. Your work at your age will build and will have recognition beyond the next 10 years, and so other opportunities will evolve, and you'll start to get to know other people at your level, and hopefully network, and opportunities will happen.
Yeah. But when you get to a certain age, you just don't have that kind of ambition.
Well, what are you, 90? You're 40.
44. Okay. Getting up there. But, it's just like I would love to do what you did, which is you became chair of the program around my age, right?
Yeah.
You were about in your early 40s.
Yeah.
And you stayed in that position, and I think there's a reason for that. If I might answer the question for you, is that it's a wonderful place to be at ground zero where everything's happening. You're dealing with prospective students, new students, interviewing students, coaching them through the system, teaching them, supervising them, helping them get jobs, getting feedback from alumni and hearing from them and bumping into them and saying, oh my God, I got this job and I'm doing this gig and now I'm supervising, and hey, how about teaching? And now you're become a teacher, and all the clients that they're working with and talking to the on-site supervisors. I don't know. It's just like you're the hub of this giant wheel and you get to enjoy like everything that's happening. I don't know. It's just, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why you stayed in the position partially, right?
Yeah.
So
it's also close to my house. only 5 minutes away. You're only 5 minutes away too.
I'm less than 5 minutes away.
Yeah, you're less than 5 minutes away. And if it's true to where they are saying, you'll still, even with the new building, you'll be less than 5 minutes away.
Well, the university is currently across the street from my abode.
Yeah.
And one of the locations they're thinking about moving is even closer to across the street.
Yeah, right. You'd gain a half a block.
That's right. So my commute would go from 3 minutes to 1.5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I tell people is, and I didn't know that, when you hired me on as full-time faculty, we were talking about this yesterday, when you offered me the position, I was like, because you just called me out of the blue and you're just like, hey, we need someone full-time faculty. I want you to be it. I think you'd be perfect for the job. And I hadn't been teaching in 4 years. I had sort of written Antioch off because again, it was just, teaching is very stressful. It's a lot of stress.
Yep.
And so at first I was like, I don't know about that, because I'm in private practice and my practice was gangbusters at the time. And it was really great because I would only work like 25 hours a week and I got paid, $80, $100 grand a year. And I was, I was just like, man, this is the easiest gig of all time. And all my clients are great and da-da-da. And then you come in with this like very stressful offer to me, and I'm like, well, it could be great though. I'm a little older now. Maybe I can handle the stress. And then I started working, and pretty instantly I realized, oh, this is nice. I think I'm at the time in my life where I can handle the stress, and being full time also allowed me time to like vent some of the stress, to walk down the hall and be like, I'm stressing out, instead of sitting at home as an adjunct and stressing out. It's a big difference between adjunct and full time, And so what I've been saying since then is I'm probably going to die in my office, one day. I'm never going to retire. You're retiring, but I don't think I ever want to retire. You're just, I'm going to be like 90 something.
You think that because you're 40.
and people will be like, Kirk didn't show up to class, and there's kind of a funky smell coming from his office.
He's dead, huh?
Yeah, it's just like, and then they'll have to break the door in, and I'll be sitting there on my computer correcting a paper, and they'll say, well, he died doing what he loved.
Yep.
But you'll be long gone before that, so.
Probably.
So what's your advice?
Well,
how do I do this job, Paul?
What I was saying is that you're very conscientious. You've done all the work. You've seen me do it. I think probably the most complicated part. I mean, you've mastered all the technical parts, and you have a vision. You understand the program. You understand the people. I think the only thing that's left is mastering the politics, and the politics are not. There's no simple set of rules there. There are constant shifts at the university around how people are going to influence it. You're just entering into a political situation, which you just experienced yesterday, where all of a sudden people are saying, well, what do we need the chairs for? The art of being a chair is also the art of being a politician.
Yeah.
And to influence decision making in directions to keep your program and keep your position going. And that's always, there's a million ways to do it.
Yeah, and for podcast listeners out there, just to provide some context, one of the main political actions that I've seen you take is to advocate for the CFT program,
right?
To push administration to let us hire more faculty, to push administration to market our program more, to push administration to let us have more offices or more resources, or to advocate for a faculty member. I mean, I would say, from my perspective, a vast majority of your political actions are geared toward protecting CFT students, protecting CFT faculty, protecting the program, getting higher salaries for people, this sort of thing. It's always in the effort of your faculty and your students. It's not a personal political thing like that you want to rule the world. You're advocating for the program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to be that way too, because without you doing that for me when I was under you, I would have felt alone and hurt and marginalized, without you fighting for me when I wanted you to fight for me. I might not have lasted quite as long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As an employee, you want your boss to fight for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you always did that. In fact, I would say you did that when I didn't want you to do that. There would be times when somebody would be messing with me, and I'd be like, Paul, just don't do anything about it. I mean, I would literally tell you that. Just, Paul, just don't. I know you're going to create a stink about this. Just don't do anything about it, because I don't want the attention. And you'd be like, nope. I'm going to do something about it.
Well, I mean, there's a dictum: if you mess with my faculty, you mess with me.
Right.
So you have to let people know that.
Yeah.
So don't. I don't think anybody's quaking in their boots, but there is a principle there. But the effect.
I think they quake in their boots.
The effect, though, is, as you say, that I have your back,
right?
And that I will go to bat for you pretty much under all circumstances, and especially if someone tries to marginalize you, then I feel like they're marginalizing me,
right,
because you're part of me. And if you know that, we are a team and we back up each other and we support each other. Maybe we might have our own internecine conflicts, but in terms of how we present ourselves to the larger group, we're one.
Yeah, well, that's a great model to follow, and I don't think I've done that for the faculty so far. So I think.
Well, you haven't had an opportunity to, but you will.
I think I have that. I think I have to emphasize, but it's not a natural kind of thing, because I don't think I'm as much as a fighter as you are, Paul. Honestly.
No, but you have good Japanese roots.
Yeah.
That comes from that culture too. Of loyalty.
Yeah, definitely.
and support, and you have a very strong kinship group yourself. And I mean, it's not organized that way. That's a little more Irish on my part, and Irish don't have as strong as kinship roots as you do.
Oh.
I mean, it's not like if you screw with one person, you're screwing with me, but it's like, we have to hang together no matter what.
Well, there were Irish mafia in the old days.
Yeah. But I think the Irish are more.
They can become more fragmented.
Yeah.
Yeah. Japanese families tend
not as close knit, but on the other hand, they may be more loose knit. But still, if you mess with one of theirs, they act as if they're tight knit, and they're very insulted and take umbrage.
Right.
To some extent, that's why the South is a more violent part of the country, because it is more composed of Scots-Irish who take more offense to, they come from herding cultures, and herding cultures are not agriculture, they're not sedentary. So their possessions can always be wiped out at any point. And so it forced them to have more clannish way of thinking. And when you insult any member of the clan, it's a way of adding cultural coherence to it. And as a result, people from Scots-Irish have more umbrage for insults, and they end up being more violent in their behavior. If you look at the assault rates and the murder rates, and you look in the South and you look at the occupation of the South by Scots-Irish, it's like unprecedented. I mean, the South comprises maybe, I'm going to guess, something like 15 to 20% of the United States population, but they comprise about 40% of the murder and assault rates. So ethnicity means, a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that, about herd versus agriculture, herd cultures, and how. And
if you look at like Eastern Arabic cultures are more herding cultures too, and same thing. They get all worked up, and they're
get away from my sheep. Well, so the last question I have for you is advice for the new generation of therapists. What advice do you have?
Well, I think the problem is
and students for that matter.
Yeah, well, the problem is now it's not enough just to be good. I mean, clinically good, because it's so competitive, and so the new generation of effective therapists are going to be pretty good at networking and marketing themselves in a way that's very different than now. I mean, even now it's pretty competitive, but as you can imagine, it's going to be, just the competition is so intense that everybody has to be a good business person to be a success now. And so I think
in a way that wasn't true before.
Yeah. And so I think there's just much more pressure. And, the intuitive feeling types that come to the profession are not particularly interested in the business part of being a therapist. And so it's hard on them.
Yeah.
But we have to convince them that if they want to do this, they're going to have to master the universe in that domain as well. Yeah. And I think that's really hard on a lot of our students because they just don't want to deal with that part of life.
Some do, but most don't.
But most don't. And so I think that's a huge challenge.
Right. What other advice do you have for the next generation of therapists?
Well, I think the other advice is that we've become so eclectic in our exposure to people now. There's so many different theories, so many different models. There was more homogeneity in a way, and so the field has advanced in the sense that it's embraced lots of different theoretical models. But I think there's some extent students might face overchoice, meaning, they got to figure out, instead of having like, okay, am I going to be more humanistic, more psychoanalytical, or more behavioral in my approach? How am I going to combine those three or the two, whatever it is? Now, there are so many delineations of those. There's literally hundreds of different models out there. It has to be confusing and kind of a headache for even the smartest of people to put all that together in some meaningful thing. People do it. It's just that I think we have to figure out maybe a way to help them more, continue to integrate. I think what makes this profession interesting, there's always a million things to learn. There's always a million things to know. And I think the people who stay vibrant in the field are the people who really are always learning, always going to workshops, always engaging and trying to find out more about stuff, and are fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by certain kinds of things, and I could read all night in some cases just because it's interesting and it's new and it's always giving me,
Yeah, you're always coming to me with like, I read this book last night and it talked about the brain and it went into detail and you've absorbed all this new information.
Well, that's what makes everything interesting. So my advice is just keep doing that, because school's just like sort of the formal part, but the part where you get to do follow endless paths is that part where you get to read and study and you get to do whatever you want, whenever you want. And I think that's the most exciting thing. I remember when after I got out of high school and I started reading more on my own, I'd go through periods where I'd read everything that Ernest Hemingway wrote. I'd read everything that Aldous Huxley wrote. I'd read, and just going berserk on one author and kind of getting into their head and seeing why they write about what they write about, and reading all their novels or all their, any of the discourse they have. And I think that's what I'm saying is you just get excited about like someone's ideas about the universe and you keep following them and following them, following them.
So absorb knowledge, go into areas after graduation, learn about things that interest you and that would better yourself as a professional. Don't just stagnate on what was given to you in graduate school.
Exactly. And, you'll come across just stuff you never... If you read a lot, you come across stuff you can't anticipate.
That you didn't know you didn't know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a journey, Paul. You and I have been talking for, 2 hours.
Yeah.
How's it feel?
I'm ready to...
Move to the next phase of your day?
Yeah.
What's it like to be interviewed? I'm just curious on this topic. What's it like to think about all the future generations of CFT students?
Well, I don't particularly think in the way you frame things, so it's fun to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if all things go well, this episode will be potentially the first episode that all CFT students will listen to for eternity. They'll all go back to this first interview.
Let's hope it's edited down, though. You're not going to make them listen. I mean, not how this is going to be edited down to an hour or something.
No, every bit is scintillating stuff, Paul.
Yeah.
You're fascinating. There's nothing that can be cut.
Okay.
You're, every bit.
I could imagine a few things cut, but yeah.
No.
If you want to expose them to the whole enchilada, go for it.
Well, think about yourself. When you go to a Mexican restaurant, you order an enchilada. Do you want to have just, 10 minutes of that? No, you want the full enchilada.
Okay.
You want the whole thing.
All right.
You want to walk out of the restaurant with that satisfying feeling that you're super freaking full,
Okay, well,
you got your money's worth.
All right, well, let's give them the whole enchilada then.
All right, well, that does it for the very first episode of the Couple and Family Therapy podcast. Thanks for joining us on this long journey. And Paul, thank you so much for this interview. I wanted the first episode to be all about the history of the program and all about you, and I think that we accomplished that mission of mine.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
Bye.
All right, so that's the end of that interview from 2016. This is me in 2024. And let's take a break. When we get back, let's listen to that second interview. All right, we're back from the break. So this is me in 2024, recording after Paul had died. And let's now listen to the interview that I recorded in the early part of 2023, or 2024, sorry, after Paul had learned that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and that he had decided to have physician-assisted suicide. Let's listen to that now. Hey, deserving listeners, I have a very special guest with me on the podcast today. Paul David, my mentor and friend and father figure, is here with me in the studio. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kirk.
So I want to provide a brief history so that people listening right now can understand the significance of you in my life.
Okay.
Because just saying you were my mentor is, I think you're even bigger than a mentor in my life.
Okay.
So the history goes back to 1995, and I decided I was going to become a therapist on a whim, kind of. And I don't know how I heard about Antioch, because there's no internet back then. So I must have heard word of mouth, and I called the university, and Michelle Honey must have told me that there was an open house, and I go to open house. So it's all these prospective students, and I thought I was going to become a counselor, an individual counselor. And you were there in the front of the room, talking about what I didn't know at the time was a very new program called the Couple and Family Therapy Program that you had invented yourself. And you were splitting off to some extent from the counseling program. And you were so convincing to me because I thought, well, one, you just seemed like a person that I wanted to follow. But two, you were talking about how couple and family therapists can work with individuals, couples, and families. And I thought, wow, that sounds kind of exciting to me.
Take the package deal.
Yeah. And later on, when I was in your role at Open House and I would talk to these prospective students from your side of the fence, I would often say something like, when I was sitting in your seat and I heard that you could work with couples and families along with individuals, that excited me. Now, that's not the way everyone reacts to that. For some of you, when you hear that prospect, you're terrified of that. You say, "Oh my God, it's enough with one person in the room.
Right.
I don't want multiple people in the room." But for people like Paul and me and others, other marriage and family therapists, it's inviting. It's an attractor to have that dynamic nature of therapy or that chaos or that opportunity. So I would tell these prospective students, do you feel terrified and intrigued or terrified and dread? That might be a good indicator of the why in the road for you at this point. But anyway, so you told me, you tell everyone that there's this program and it was brand new. I think you had just started it a year earlier in 94. And I wasn't under that impression. I don't know if I would have started the program if I knew it was like a brand new thing. But anyway, because, at graduation a few years later, the counseling program had 30 students that were at the graduation ceremony, and there were 4 of us CFT students.
Yeah.
And I thought, how come there's so few of us? Anyway, so I signed up to apply, and you interviewed me. And half of the interview, you told me, because I was coming from business, from marketing, and you spent half of the interview trying to convince me not to become a therapist because I wasn't probably going to make as much money in psychology or in counseling or therapy as I would have made in marketing. And you were really, trying to make sure that I was sufficiently informed and into being a therapist. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure it was a calling, not just some kind of a new thing to do.
Right, which it was a very new thing to do.
Yeah, well, it was a new thing to do, but you have to have, the calling in the sense that I feel this way of working with people is a preferred way and is a more effective way in the long run.
Yeah, right. So did you say that to a lot of people in the beginning, that you try to convince them to not become a therapist during the interview?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, because, eventually, once I was working with you at the university, there was a lot of times or periods of time where we weren't getting enough students to pay for our salaries.
Right.
It was anxiety provoking.
Well, we're running an academic program that happens to be a business, and if you don't generate the FTE, then the business doesn't do so well, and you don't have the money to expand your program or pay your faculty. And so, as you know, we had to be very focused on enrollment. Right.
And my marketing background would come into play.
Absolutely.
When I became part of that team to market, because we're such a small university and such a small program that, okay, sure, we had a marketing team for the whole university, maybe at times, but between you and me and the listeners right now, they didn't know shit. We knew how to market our program.
Right.
And if you're a prospective student, who are you going to listen to? A marketing person or a professor / therapist in the field? You know what I mean? Especially people that went through Antioch themselves. You went through Antioch and then became a professor. I went through Antioch. I became a professor. Anyway, so then...
Do you remember that picture we took on top of the roof where you and the other faculty were all awarded Teachers of the Year by the Washington Association for Marriage and Family Therapy?
No. Well, I don't even think I have that picture.
Well, there's all of us there. There's 4 of us there: Jerry, you, Kim, and myself, and we all had won that. And we said it was a marketing thing. We called ourselves the Dream Team.
Oh yeah. We weren't on the roof. We were.
Or I don't know where
in
we
the
were.
sort of entryway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Janice was there too.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did that whole marketing thing. Well, these are people who've been awarded.
Right.
Every one of them. So
Right.
We got some going.
Right. The award was for Washington educators. So it wasn't just like local. It was like the entire state of Washington. Right. So
we did stuff like that.
Yeah. So you accepted me into the program, and I started in the program, and you were my teacher. You were my professor in family of origin, in couple therapy, in systems theory. You're also my advisor during the program. And I am the sort of student that likes to kind of lay low. So I didn't really interact with anyone, let alone you, since you were intimidating and scary when I was 26 years old. And I was walking around the halls like the last couple weeks of my program. And I bumped into you in the hallway, and you grabbed me and you said, "Hey, you're about to graduate, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And you said, "Hey, we should talk." And I'm like, "Okay." And you said, "How about now?" And I'm like, "Okay." And you bring me into your office, your famed corner office with the window that you're in in that other building, the 6th Avenue building.
Yeah.
And you talked with me about teaching and about first off, you talked with me about the rest of my career. And I was saying, I don't really know. I was hired at my internship, which was quite a fortunate thing.
What was the internship? I can't remember.
Federal Way Youth and Family Services.
Okay.
I think they're now
one of the youth and family service programs.
Yeah. They've been absorbed by a larger South Seattle area organization. But that was all that I was focused on. And, I'm 26. I'm very much a fish out of water. And then you say, well, I could help you with your post-grad career. And I was just like, what? Why? And you're like, well, I just like to help you. I was like, okay. So along those lines, Paul, patron Sheridan and Zaza, both of them asked the question, what was your first impression of Dr. Honda? What was your first impression of me?
Well, I just remember you as being very sharp, good looking, and ambitious.
Ambitious?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't think most people would characterize you as that because you're not braggadocio or anything like that. But I saw you as someone who wanted to, who wanted achievement and was ready to go.
Yeah, I was. I was
even though you weren't particularly, you didn't advertise yourself that way.
Yeah, it was funny.
It's more of an intuition too.
Okay, an intuition.
Because you're not, you're young and
yeah.
You're not sitting around saying, "I want to be the chair." Or something.
Yeah, no. So in that meeting, you asked me if I ever thought about teaching. And I said, well, I thought maybe if I was still a therapist after 10 years, I would maybe consider teaching. It does mildly appeal to me, I guess. I mean, I don't know what it would be like, but yeah, in 10 years, maybe longer, when I have enough experience and age and wisdom, I can be a teacher. And you said, well, and then you offered to help me with my private practice, getting it off the ground, and also providing supervision for free, you said. You would give me free supervision. And that's huge because, supervision costs a lot of money. Insurance doesn't cover supervision, so you have to pay these supervisors their full fee, which is usually quite high because they're experienced clinicians like yourself, So it was very generous of you. And then you offered your office, your office there in Wallingford.
Okay.
It was a really nice office.
Yeah, it was.
A big office. You said that I could just use it for free. Because often when you're in the beginning of a private practice, particularly back then, it took a while to get it off the ground, and it didn't make sense to rent an office with only one client a month. So you would often need some mentor to offer up, the Saturday that you're not in the office. So you're doing that for me.
It was in the Bridgeway building.
And so I thought, wow, what did I do to deserve this? And then you said, well, as a payment for all this, Kirk, I want you to help me out with my classes, you said. And I was like, oh, help you out with what do you mean? And you're like, well, you could correct the papers or something. And I said, oh, okay. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I'm not good at writing, so why would I? But okay, if that's all that it takes, then All right, I'll do that. What were you thinking at the time? Because I think it's clear you wanted me to be teaching, but you also knew that I didn't feel I was up for it. Do you remember this time?
I don't remember details, but it's one step at a time. So, just taking smaller steps made more sense than, just shoving you into the classroom or something.
Yeah.
So, and also, I want to point out that I mentored you the way I was mentored. Oh. When I graduated from the UW, I had some experiences as a Vista, and I was at the Vista Training Center.
So Vista is kind of like domestic Peace Corps.
That's domestic Peace Corps, right. And there was a guy there named Jim Booth who was on the faculty of School of Public Affairs at the University of Oregon. He was a director. And the day I graduated, or the week I graduated, he called me up and asked me if I wanted to take on a faculty position there. Here I am, I just graduated.
How old would you have been?
I was, let's see, I don't remember how old I was.
20s?
I'm 77 now. Probably late 20s. And so he says, do you want to? I said, yeah, of course. I mean, I was kind of shocked, but that kind of belief.
Yeah.
So then I go and teach. I moved to Eugene, and I'm teaching at the University of Oregon. And then another guy that I had worked with in Vista, named Ed Jacobs, was part of a program called the Human Services Program at Western Washington University. It was a brand new program. And he calls me up and says, how would you like to work up here? These are all people I had worked with in the Domestic Peace Corps.
And they were superiors of yours?
Yeah.
And they saw something in you?
Yeah. And so, again, I go from, I only have a BA degree, and I'm teaching in the School of Public Affairs at the University of Oregon, and then another guy calls me, and I'm up at Western Washington University teaching in the Human Services Program. And then another guy up there, once I get in that program, these are all mentors, named Dean Elias. He founded the Antioch program in Seattle. Same thing happened again. Dean asked me if I wanted to go down and teach at Antioch. All these people believed in me. All these people mentored me. All these people set up experiences where I could grow and learn. But they all did it when I didn't know that much. I wasn't a well-qualified person in certain ways. They saw potential in me, and so I'm taking that story and bringing it back to you. Same thing. I was mentoring you the way I was mentored.
Yeah. Some of the patrons had that question regarding, were you mentored and how were you mentored?
Yeah.
But, I remember you telling me some of those details, but I don't know if I made the connection that it was exactly the same as what you did. And not only what you did with me, but what you did with a handful of prominent Antioch professors.
And the people at Antioch and at Western were all interested in experiential learning. So they taught me a lot about how to work with adults, taking what's called an andragogical approach rather than a pedagogical approach with adults, which just means you base the learning experience on the individuals in the classroom. You engage them around their experience. You don't just, give your experience or impose some kind of a learning model on them that you think is swell, but doesn't really relate to them that intimately.
So what are the principles of this?
Well, the principles, you start with the learner. So like I mentored you, when you start the class, you ask people, what they're interested in. You don't just start the class and say, here's what we're going to learn. Yes, of course, there is a subject to the class, but it has to be based and primarily derived from the individual's own perspective. And so, at the beginning of the class, we ask people, well, what do you want to learn? And then you start evolving out of their experience the content of your class, and you link it into their experience. So
yeah, that makes students also feel more safe,
right,
more connected. Also, putting them in the position of driver, they have to own their education. They can't just passively absorb it.
Right. So, we did that. One trick I would do, I think you might remember this, we start the class, there'd be 20 people in the class, people would go around and introduce themselves, and then after that I would go back and I'd memorize their names and go back around and talk to each person about what they said. And they're kind of thinking like, whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a gimmick, but it gets them
I'm not great with that. I could never.
No, but it was,
But you could.
Yeah, it was a way of engaging them in a way that said, I'm paying attention to you.
Yeah.
You're important to me. Your perspective's important to me. Yes, I'm the teacher, so a certain amount of that is important, but it's a student-centered learning experience, not a teacher-centered learning experience.
Yeah. And if the class was like statistics, it would be a different thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of the classes that were core to training to be a clinician had to do with how to be a human being, how to listen, how to know yourself, how to know other people, how to stretch your mind, how to paradigm shift, how to love, how to hate, how to be. And that meant that a lot of the class time should be centered around that and not a PowerPoint, right?
Yep.
So your class would have, often you would start with a poem or a comic strip, right? You would show these transparencies.
Every class had a cartoon and a quote of the day.
Like a Far Side cartoon or something.
Yeah, or something like that, yeah.
And then you would there would be discussions and then a little bit of lecture and then small groups and then demonstrations and then role plays, all within a 3-hour period, all these different exercises. I absolutely modeled my, teaching style off of that, obviously. Yeah. So then you ask me to help out with the class and I say, oh, okay. We had class. I remember this. It was Family of Origin, and you said, maybe you should come to class just so you know what's happening in the class, so that when you correct papers, you can know the context. And I was like, okay. So I came to class, and I thought I would just be sitting in the back trying to be invisible so I wouldn't interfere with anything. And then after that first class, you said, okay, next week you're going to be teaching the class. And so at no point had you floated this idea until I was kind of locked in,
Yeah.
Because you're my supervisor now, which you need to get supervision licensing wise anyway. Yeah. And you're offering me your office. It's free supervision. How can I say no to you? It was a great opportunity, and I'm glad you did it. And I needed that push, clearly. But the way that I frame it to the listeners is that, and just anyone who asks, is you tricked me in a good way. I think that you tricked me beyond my anxiety or my lack of self-belief or something into teaching, because what ended up, so do you remember anything about that?
Not really.
Yeah. But does that sound like your style?
Yeah, it sounds like stuff I would do, yeah.
It was a strategy. It was like it, but it shows that you were spending energy and time to think about how to shepherd me. How to get me from A to Z. Right? You didn't just throw it out there and I turned it down, and you didn't just say, "Well, that's that. Moving on with life." You're like, "Well, what is the thinking there? Do you think?" Well,
it's the same thing that we're doing in our pedagogy, and that is, you're giving people an experience.
Yeah.
I was giving you an experience rather than, talking about it. Well, do you want to teach? I mean, that like, what? Because you've never done it before. But if you give, if I bring you in and you help out, you're gradually getting an experience, and it makes more sense. You're more connected to it. And then, you're more likely to jump in the fray when it's offered.
So as chair, as program director for so many years, you would almost always get professors this way. You would know them first, either as friends, colleagues, or students, and then you would slowly integrate them into Antioch. And then I started doing that myself, and I preferred that because I don't want to work with someone, because, when you hire someone off the street, even with pretty lengthy interview processes, you don't know what you're going to get until you're working with them.
And, they have to, the true test is they have to, be able to make it happen in the classroom. So you don't know that either. I mean, you can support them and get them ready, but ultimately, if they don't have the chops to do that, then it doesn't work out.
Right. So it's more labor intensive, but the payoff is so much better, and you're much more bonded as a boss and employee, because when you're chair, you're their boss.
Yeah.
And so when I would do that, I would find it much preferable. The downside is that you're not usually getting the best candidates on paper, right? They don't have the best resumes.
Right.
Because the best resumes are people from out of state, and they apply and they rise to the top based on their qualifications. So it's harder to sell to upper administration, which you would run into sometimes.
But you're looking at interpersonal competence, not just academic competence.
I know.
And that interpersonal is like huge because you're teaching, and teaching involves relating. Mm-hmm. And if you can't relate, if you're just smart and know a lot of stuff, but you can't relate, no cigar.
Yeah. And I and you have seen some examples of that consequence playing out when you hire people through the normal interview process, some disastrous situations. So anyway, you say you're going to teach next week, and I agree to it, but it throws me into this massive anxiety attack. I mean, the amount of anxiety, I still feel anxiety about teaching. I hate being on stage. It's a thing.
Okay. Well, you're by nature more introverted.
I don't know if introversion is the right word. I don't know. I have a desire to be on stage, but I am terrified of being there. My body is terrified of being on stage. You know? Anyway, so the night before teaching, 6 days later, I'm pacing around my apartment. I can't even think straight because I'm so anxious, and I am holding my cordless phone about to call you and tell you I can't do this. I'm sorry for disappointing you. Looking back, I'm pretty sure you would have just said, well, no biggie, you can teach next quarter or something. But I thought it was do or die, which I think was a good thing because it pushed me past it, and I didn't call you, and I did teach that class. It was on Bowen. And
did that class go well for you?
Well,
I can't remember.
I remember so many details about this. The fact that I didn't run out of the room screaming and in fear was a success.
Yeah.
So seriously, I thought, well, I managed to speak for the entire class, and the students weren't laughing at me. And then right afterwards, I asked you what you thought, and I was sure you were going to say, you're a little nervous. You didn't say, well, you might have said that, but I thought for sure you would say, you're a terrible professor. I made a terrible mistake. And I don't know exactly what you said, but you just did. You said exactly the right thing to make me feel like, oh, maybe I do have an ability here or something. And so the next time I taught, the next week, I was a little less anxious, and
well, I also started out in a class that's basically fun to teach. When you get into it,
when you're not terrified out of your mind.
Yeah, but eventually, when you're listening to other people's stories and getting them to talk, it's every person's interesting, and everybody's got a story. And when you teach that class, you learn about their stories, and it pulls you in, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, so from a teaching point of view, you don't just have to be Mr.
Know-it-all
encyclopedia or something. You get to, engage people and then tell your story too.
Right.
So that's kind of cool.
Well, I think when you know your shit so well that you can just relax and enjoy it, then I think it goes well. But when you don't really know, I mean, I had literally just graduated 2 weeks earlier and I was younger, especially back then.
Yeah.
Most of the students were in their 30s, 40s, 50s. I'm in my 20s, mid-20s. I just didn't think things were going to work out for me in terms of ability and when I was a student, I felt like most of the students knew more than I did.
Okay.
Anyway, so then I volunteer or I pay you back for the supervision that you're giving me by helping you. But really, I was helping you, but it probably meant more work for you because you had to talk with me all the time and maybe degrade your class quality by allowing me to teach some of the class. So
no, but it was just a way of getting you going,
Yeah. So I did that for a year.
I mean, I didn't know the way you're describing it as you being so anxious. I mean, I knew that it was hard for you because obviously you hadn't done it before and you wanted to, you had a high standard for yourself, so you wanted to do good. But that would be the best way to hone talent.
Yeah, and I would do that myself. I did the exact same model with my mentees. I would get to know them, then I would have them assistant teach.
Yeah.
It also, when you have an assistant teacher, it shows that the person really wants to teach because they're volunteering their time.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just doing it for a gig.
Right.
They have a drive. You know?
Most academic professors, are used to sitting in a classroom and having someone hopefully be quite knowledgeable and be able to present material in a very cogent way. And so that's kind of their model of, being intellectually adept and being able to present academic material in an engaging way. But it's all done in a way where they're the star performer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, or trying to be the star performer, and in the way that I wanted it to be. You're part of a learning process, and you engage the students with their experience and make it more student centered. It's not so much instructor centered, and that just makes a richer kind of experience. Yes, you have knowledge that they don't have, but it's in the context of their own experience that it's expressed, which means it's going to be way more meaningful to the learner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was the idea anyway.
Yeah, makes sense. So then you hire me after a year of assistant teaching. And by the way, throughout that whole year, you're meeting with me once a week and
this sort of supervision.
For supervision in your office.
Yeah.
And we're talking about my early work as a therapist. We're talking about my personal life, and we're also talking about teaching. And every week I would teach, and then every week you would meet with me, and we would talk about what I did and what I'm going to do. And
okay.
And then after the class, we would talk, just a lot of you teaching me and mentoring me and inspiring me and believing in me. It was just this real belief in me that connected to a part of myself that wanted to do it, but would never have done it otherwise. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then you hire me, and I'm on my own teaching, and then I was off and running and was teaching as an adjunct for many years, and then became full-time professor, and then you shepherded me or mentored me to be your job, to be eventually your boss, your chair, your program director. You had never had another person as a chair before, and you started the program. So then you wanted me to take over the program. And I watched you as a chair for 20 years or 15 years up until that point, and did not envy the pressure and the responsibility of your job. But I felt beholden, because I knew you wanted to retire, and I didn't know what it'd be like. I thought maybe it'd be livable, and I did it. And then after the first year, I was totally into it and did all the things. Or then at the end of that first year was our reaccreditation, and I just completely burnt out. And
accreditation is
yeah,
very tedious, and huge amount of time has to go into it, and it's massively technical.
Yeah, it's like being a lawyer,
Yeah, and there's just so many micro criteria about your program that you never really think about that much until you start going through the ringer, and boy, it's intense.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have a site visit, and you got to have everything.
Right. Officials, three officials fly to your town and stay in Seattle for a number of days, and it's like they're cops that are investigating a murder, and you're trying to avoid implication or indictment or something. And they're just, and because that there are cracks in the foundation that you just hope they don't find. And the whole time and the problem with me is that I am too independent. I'm pathologically independent. So I didn't ask for any help. And so I basically just did the whole thing by myself, which was not a good idea. But anyway, so that kind of broke me in a way. And I started to get burnt out, and all the things that would bother you, of course, because it would bother you and it would bother anybody, like all the meetings and the politics and stuff. It just became unbearable at that point for me. And so I started to fantasize about an exit strategy. And we had some younger, more energetic professors that had it in them. Jen Sampson, who's currently program director, she had already proven herself to be able to lead as the leader of the hoarding project and had her own clinic, I believe.
Yeah, she did.
So, and I think she was president of some professional organization by that point. Anyway, I thought, well, I'll throw it out to her, and she really seemed to be into it. And she's been program director now for 6 or 7 years and seems to be going strong. So it's like some people are made for that kind of job and some people aren't.
Yeah, I was actually surprised, though, that she ended up in that role because she's pretty reserved in many ways and is seemed pretty polite and nice. And in some ways, that job requires a kind of toughness.
Yeah, you were real tough.
And a kind of, you know this from a lot of different things that would happen where, basically if you had to be willing to go to war for what you believed in. And if you didn't go to war, you were going to get creamed.
Right.
And because there's other people out there who were not, I won't get into details, but basically, people just, caught up in their own egomania or whatever. And so you have to be able to fight for what you believe in.
Right. The thing I saw you do was that you would fight for the students and your professors when outside forces were trying to harm us. You weren't just fighting for your own ego or your own benefit necessarily. You were protective of your professors and of your students, and of the field of marriage and family therapy as well. It sometimes would extend to that broader category. Actually,
Antioch, though, was the most marginalizing force that I experienced.
Right. Administration.
Not other outside forces. It was more internal.
Coworkers,
things like that.
Yeah. People who on paper had more power than you did, but in reality, you always were at the top of the pyramid in terms of like political actual power. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because, we would get new administrators that would get hired off the street and thought they were in control. Mm-hmm. But when you have professors who are the core of a university, especially ours, band together and say, look, pal, just because you think you're our boss doesn't mean we have to do what you're going to do. And this is pre-unionization, by the way.
Right. Well, we had... I had forged cooperative relationships with the people in counseling and psychology, which was big because we're all in the same psychology program. And Ned Farley, who was the chair of the mental health counseling program, and I always figured out how to cooperate and work together and merge our programs. He was a wonderful colleague to work with. And in some cases, there was undermining that was starting to take place.
Right.
And so that, that's more internal dynamics going on, where the psych people, for example, saw the marriage and family as a lesser than.
Right. And, well, some of them did.
Some of them did.
And the other part of it, so not only were you a bulldog and would fight effectively, quietly, but effectively. Quietly meaning you never yelled at anybody. But once you got momentum going, there was just nothing that was going to stop you. And everyone kind of knew that. The other aspect, though, is that you would forge relationships with people that you would have conflicts with. You would sit down with them for a couple hours and just chat, or about the issue at hand. You would quietly, just calmly, differentiatedly sit in the exact same way you're sitting right now, with your hands crossed across your, clasped in front of your, and you would just say, what's going on? You're just very calm. But also you would forge relationships and joke around. And I modeled myself after you in that way. Okay. I saw that you would do that, and I would watch how that would help so much when, the shit hit the fan and you had to go into the administrative wing and talk to a certain administrator, there was a familiarity there, a bond that could be the foundation for a compromise or an understanding or an influence. You would twist the screws on someone a little bit and they would give in, And,
on that note, when I was in the Domestic Peace Corps, I trained at the University of Colorado, and it was a school for training community organizers. And when you're trying to organize a community around various issues, you have to know all the players, and you have to have relationships with all the players, including the people you didn't necessarily see as on your side. So it taught me a lot about if you want to get something done, especially the people who are not necessarily supportive of you, is to form a relationship with them and get their point of view. Mm-hmm. And when I was working on in Nevada on an Indian reservation, that reservation consisted of Shoshone and Paiute peoples, and they were pushed together for lots of complicated reasons. They were not. The Paiutes were indigenous to that part of the world, and the Shoshone were pushed on there, and so the Paiute obviously resented the Shoshone. But in a more deeper way, tribalism is such that each party sees themselves as superior to the other. There's a principle in anthropology called the principle of segmental opposition. I am a good Paiute. I'm not a stinking Shoshone. I am a good Shoshone. I'm not a stinking Paiute. So they're pushed together. They naturally have animosity towards each other, but they live in the same area. They occupy the same land. They have to cooperate. And when I came there, they had no running water. And so, and the reason they didn't have any running water is because somehow they felt if they went ahead with the project, because it would be all paid for by the federal government, they wouldn't cost them anything, the Indian Health Service would install it. But they felt that by going with that, plus the Paiutes were traditionally water haulers, that one party would have an advantage over the other. Going back to this idea of tribalism, we don't want to do anything that will allow the other group to, get a one-up on us. And so I learned very early, you have to, to get people to work together, you have to really get to know them and understand their perspective and get them to talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of thinking I kind of used in terms of my work at Antioch too, because Antioch itself has got its own fiefdoms and groups and things like that, and so keeping that awareness and helping them, find ways that they can cooperate is a fundamental principle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how many people still do that at Antioch, really.
No, I don't think so now.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I feel like you were probably the best at it, but I feel like a lot of that generation, your generation of professors were like that.
Yeah. And we were, from that point of view, we felt we were bringing a kind of freshness to graduate education that wasn't there before, and so and to clinical training.
Yeah, a sort of radical, or not. You were trying to break from traditional, stuffy models of education,
right? And
you threw everything out the window and said, okay, well, let's actually look at what works.
Yeah.
Like with grades, with Antioch, you got rid of grades.
Yeah.
Because you're thinking, do grades actually help to produce therapists that are effective or not?
Right.
Turned out there's no evidence of that, so why have grades?
Well, and as you recall too, the assessment you would give would describe the learning of each learner. So for that particular quarter, it describes actually what their strengths and what their weaknesses are.
Their grade was a written
assessment, which
is
way more
professor. Yeah.
way more valuable.
Yeah. They did this well. They should work on that.
Yeah.
As with most students, they should continue learning this.
Right.
But yeah.
And so it's part of their learning record. It becomes part of their transcript.
Right.
Which is, we thought, the way real evaluation should take place.
Right. Well, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's talk about your recent diagnosis. What do you say?
Sure.
All right, we're back from the break. So just to summarize your importance in my life, and there are some more questions from the patrons regarding this, but for my career, by far, you're the most influential person on my career. I don't know if I ever would have became a teacher, honestly, because if you wouldn't have pulled me into your office that day and tricked me into being a professor so skillfully, I can't imagine how I would have become a teacher. Because, once you're separated from the institution and from those relationships, it's really hard to get your foot in the door, particularly when you just have a master's degree like I did back then. Mm-hmm. And I probably just would have said, well, I guess it's not in the cards for me or something. And then if I wasn't a professor, would I ever have become a podcaster? Because the podcasting thing emerged from a period of time where I wasn't teaching for a year or two, and I had an itch to teach because I have a drive for that, and I missed it. So, it's just really interesting to think about what would have happened. So recently, we were at a memorial, unfortunately, for our friend. Jerry was closer to you, and he had died. And tell me what you told me.
Yeah, so at the memorial, of course, there were all kinds of people from Antioch there, and I was telling them that I have early stage Alzheimer's, and that as I evolve in that neurodegenerative disease, I was going to do an assisted suicide with an organization called Dignitas in Switzerland. And so I was not going to go through the later stages of the disease where you're pretty much drooling on yourself and you've lost your executive and your body function capacities. So
what's it like to go through this?
Well, it's I'm writing an article about it right now, and it's called "Killing Yourself is More Complicated Than You Think." And what I go through is, the various criteria about what is a peaceful suicide. Mm-hmm. A peaceful suicide is one where you are using a method that is a calming method, not one like most other forms of suicide involve strangulation or gunshot kinds of things. This is a method where you're administered a sodium pentobarbital, which basically shuts your respiratory system down. You basically go to sleep within an hour of ingestion, and you basically die. And Dignitas is this organization in Switzerland that does assisted suicide with that means. And so that became my deal. But getting through their criteria is quite involved. You have to write a life story. You have to have medical records. And by the way, when you go there, you have to be in the early stages of your disease, because you have to be still able to make decisions that are legally binding in the sense that you're
to be competent.
You have to be of right mind and competent. So it's a little bit tricky,
right? Because to me, it would, I don't know, I would prefer it if I were in your shoes, if I could live until my cognitive abilities were such that I was so confused, or confused enough most of the time, that my quality of life had significantly been diminished, and then take me out of this world, even if I don't comprehend what's happening. But I pre-consented,
Yeah.
But it makes sense, I guess, that you have to have the person consenting in the moment, which means they have to not be progressed in their Alzheimer's, and
right.
Which means that you're losing some time,
Yeah.
Maybe not a lot of time, but you're losing some time.
There are 3 stages to disease. I'm going to simplify it, but the first stage is, of course, the obvious, where your short-term memory is compromised. And then stage 2, your executive functions are compromised, your ability to problem solve and things like that. And then stage 3 is you have those diminishments that go with stage 1 and stage 2, plus you no longer can control your body functions. Speech, balance, things like that are all compromised. So eventually you have to be taken care of because you don't have the ability to take care of yourself, nor do you have the ability to make decisions, nor do you have the ability to remember anything.
Right. You're just confused.
You're confused, yeah. And I went to I'm seeing a neurologist regularly now because he's trying to measure the degree of decline, which gives me a sense of what my timing needs to be. And, I go into the waiting room and there are these people sitting there. They're completely blank in their facial expressions. No blinking, nothing. They're like zombie-like. That's what I don't want to go there.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about this when my uncle went through early onset Alzheimer's in his 60s, I believe, and early 60s maybe. And he was a world-renowned architect in Burbank, California, and was part of a architectural firm, as an owner.
High-functioning professional.
Yeah. And then he started to experience symptoms, and his daughter and wife started noticing, but he was always a little forgetful anyway, so they just chalked it up to that. But then it got pretty bad, and then they started to really try to help him, but no one really faced it, and particularly he didn't face it. And, there was a period of time like you're in right now where you have the ability to comprehend what's happening to you. You have the ability to remember, I don't remember. There's a certain point where you cross a line and you don't remember.
Right.
And so he just never faced it, which I think is what most people do.
Well, you because it occurs in your 60s, generally speaking, you chalk it up to aging because there's this certain amount of diminishment of memory that goes with aging.
Exactly.
And so you can't find your phone. It's because I'm...
Senior moment,
right. And so you rationalize that to yourself, like I'm just getting old. But there's a distinction between dementia, which is a normal degrading of your cognitive capacity with age, and Alzheimer's, which is a disease that forms plaque in your hippocampus primarily and your temporal lobes. And so that plaque literally not only gums up the neural firing, but it eventually starts destroying neurons.
Yeah.
And so then you lose the capacity not only to think, but to organize your movement, and your whole somatic functioning is compromised.
Right. And I want to be clear, my aunt and uncle and cousin are lovely people. I don't blame them for it's a rough situation. I think you are in a very small group of people who face it head on, maybe because of your background and your intelligence. But did you run into that Y in the road where you're thinking, because, when you start to have symptoms of getting older, it's hard to admit. It's a loss. You don't want to admit it to yourself.
Sure.
So how did you overcome that?
Well, a big influence was my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother had Alzheimer's and my mother had Lewy bodies. I know she had Lewy bodies because she had a craniectomy after she died. She was part of a study. You don't really know definitively until you form an autopsy whether what the exact problem was. But it's basically identified by the type of plaque that forms in your brain. And one type of plaque was discovered by a guy named Lewy body, and the other type is Alzheimer's. They're just different researchers who identified the nature of the plaque. But anyway, I saw my grandmother completely deteriorate, and she became animal-like. And she was so sweet to me, and she was such a lovely woman to me, and she was just a great grandmother. She's my mom's mom. It was devastating to see her just turn into a feral state, and irritable, and just kind of ghastly to see her. It was a horrible experience to see her as a young boy that way. And then, of course, my mom did the same thing. I took care of my mom till the end. And
You're real close to your mom.
Yeah. And so that was
You're the oldest son.
I was the oldest son.
And the oldest kid, and you took care of your mom throughout your life.
Yeah.
Even when you were a kid.
So that had a huge impact on my decision.
Yeah. Did you?
I mean, so it's more. I mean, people will say, "Well, you're really being really brave" or something like that. I get that, but it's more like I just don't want to go through it.
But I think it does take courage.
Well, it does
to face
but
death. And
yeah, but I don't want to go through that kind of. I grew up as the oldest. I prize myself on being independent and in control.
You don't want to bother your wife.
Well, no, I don't want to bother anybody, and so that would just be anathema to me.
Yeah, me too.
So that's the reason. I mean, that's the long explanation for.
Well, I don't know if it's long. I think there could be a lot that you could talk about because I think it's infinitely deep in its.
It is complicated because you're basically planning your own demise.
Yeah.
That's kind of strange.
Yeah.
Because you got to, write
paperwork in your demise.
To do all this paperwork to prove that you are.
Allow me to die.
That you're of sound mind. That you're not depressed. By the way, that's a huge factor. If you read the book "In Love" by Amy Bloom, she describes what it was like to go through that course with Dignitas, and in the process of giving the paperwork to the authorities at Dignitas, the psychiatrist that her husband Brian was seeing mentioned depression, and it shut down the whole process. Any inkling of depression.
Yeah. Well, why do you think that is?
Well, because Dignitas wants to be very careful that they're only doing this for people who have, are fully comprehending what they're doing and embrace it, and they're not being coerced by anybody else to do it as well. You can imagine in some situations where a spouse might be more interested in gaining financial advantage as a result of the deterioration of their partner. Things like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suspect that when it comes to depression, of course it's nuanced, but it is, for some, they have cyclical depression and cyclical suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
So it's not a permanent aspect or a rational decision that one is making. And how do we make that determination? Because wouldn't having Alzheimer's and dying and the grief of that be depressing? Might that cause a little bit of depression? Well,
yeah. The distinction I will make and do make is it makes me sad.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say. Well, you have to be very careful. I wouldn't say it leads to clinical depression, but it is depressing. I mean, how could it not be?
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's depressing.
In the times that I've talked with you about it, I don't hear, and you don't have to express or have, but I would be freaking out if I were in your shoes.
Well, I made it to 77. I have good retirement. I made it sort of almost to the goal line in terms of life, and then you have this, and so that's not exactly a joyous.
You had plans for the future.
Yeah. And, it's harder to read. It's harder to do a lot of intellectual tasks now than it was before.
Because that's a big deal to you.
Big deal. I'm a huge reader.
And writer.
And so, yeah, my writing works pretty good, but the reading is a little bit more complicated. I've just finished Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. 600-page biography of his. He's a complicated guy, and he's an interesting guy. And Walter Isaacson is a really good biographer. I don't know if you read his biography of Steve Jobs, but I mean he's up there, in terms of a really good writer. So it's fun to read. I still enjoy it. I just finished that and hope Elon Musk does a little better.
What do you mean?
Well, he's got Asperger's. He's brilliant. He just bought Twitter. He did pretty good with things like SpaceX and Tesla because those are innovative technologies that he would be good at and finding people who are good at. The Twitter thing is way more complicated because it's not just a social media company. It's all kinds of, and then he is a person who believes in free speech, but you have complicated bots, trying to shape social opinion, and how you censor or you don't censor those that information is a big deal for our society, and he's not really the guy to do it, because he's very torn about being heavy-handed, except when it involves him, and then he starts using Twitter to his own advantage. He does the same things that he won't do with others. If they annoy him or piss him off, he cuts them off.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a little off the beaten path.
Yeah, well, we go down that rabbit hole. But I have to say, for me, when you told me, it was a huge shock. I mean, in the same paragraph, short paragraph, as you're talking, we're standing there at the memorial, you tell me, one, you have Alzheimer's, which is terrible, and two, that you're going to be dying soon. And you didn't have any caveats, or you just sort of laid it out. And on one hand, I respect that. On the other hand, I'm just like, give me a second to absorb this.
Yeah.
Do you find that reaction from people?
Sure. Well, anytime you talk about killing yourself, that's going to cause a reaction of people that's mixed.
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly how I felt then, but now I totally get it. What are you going to do? I mean, it's the right choice. It's the logical. It's the choice for yourself. It's the choice for your family. It's the choice for your legacy, if you will.
Right.
It's the choice for.
I didn't mention this, but forgetting about all the emotional stuff, there goes your retirement. Because what happens is, once you need skilled nursing care for over 6 months, I believe, then it comes out of your pocket. So you have health insurance.
Oh, if you hadn't had,
if you have health insurance, it's not going to cover it after 6 months.
If you didn't choose to kill yourself, then
you'd bankrupt your family.
You would bankrupt your family.
Yeah,
right?
They run your account down to zero.
Right.
Right. So most people don't think about that, but you're imposing a lot when and people are going to, once you're in a nursing home, they're going to want to, take care of you. I mean, that's human, but they're going to charge you an arm and a leg. Yeah. Most of the memory units are in the $10,000 a month category.
Yeah.
So there goes your retirement.
Why Switzerland?
Oh, that's just where they are.
You can't do it in the States?
No.
I thought they had Canada and the United States. I thought.
Well, you have right to die laws, but that's when you have 6 months to live.
Oh.
By the time you have 6 months to live with Alzheimer's, you don't know who you are.
So you have to be decidedly by two independent physicians 6 months to live.
Yeah. So then
seems like it should be modified to include.
Yeah, but it's not, and so that law works good. I mean, it's effective for people with cancer, things like that, but it's terrible for someone who has Alzheimer's because you're so far gone. What's the point?
Yeah. Is it expensive to do this? Seems like flying.
Oh yeah, it's about. Well, you have to get there, and I'm going to bring my wife, my son, and my daughter-in-law because I want them to be there. When
is this, by the way?
Probably in the. I don't have a date with them yet, but I'm shooting for the fall.
Okay.
So getting that organized is complicated. Maybe later, but that's the idea, is to do it while I am still of sound mind. I mean, that's the delicate balance. I want to live as long as I can,
right?
But I don't want to postpone it so that the disease progresses in such a way so that I can't be competent.
Right. Would there be a scenario where you would move the date forward if your symptoms progress faster than you think they would?
I'm in the beginning of the middle stages, so I got some time. I pressed my neurologist about it, and of course he's reluctant. The standard deviation is large because it's so individual for each person.
Would there be a scenario where you might get another couple of years?
Well, here's the data. In the United States, the time between diagnosis and death, the mean is 7 years. So I was just diagnosed in the last year, but that means I've had it. I've already progressed a certain amount during that time, because you don't.
Death by Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the research is such, they know when you're diagnosed, so they can measure that, and then they just calculate or just
but
measure.
There's so many variables. Some people resist going to the doctor.
Some people live 15 years, and
some people are like you, where they're immediately going to the doctor.
Yeah, right.
So,
but
people don't have access to.
That's the data I have.
But your neurologist believes that by 2025 it'll be too late.
He wouldn't say that way, but what you do is you say, I have to meet the standard of competence, and would the fall be too soon or too late, given what you know so far, to demonstrate competence? I'm not. You don't really put it in terms of suicide, but competence.
Right.
And so he can say, he said, that's probably doable. That's how it comes out. It doesn't come out where he can give anything definitive, but you can shape the question in such a way as ask him, does he think, given what he knows, that would be a reasonable time period? And it's obviously shorter than longer, meaning, I think I would progress. If it's 7 years, I still would have 2 or 3, maybe possibly good years. But right now, it's difficult because, just to give you an idea, when I wake up each morning, I don't know what day it is. Now, when you wake up, sometimes you don't know what day it is, but most of the time it's built into your clock.
Yeah. There's references 2 days ago was Sunday, so
yeah.
It must be Tuesday.
So I have to look at my phone to see what day it is.
So what else do you experience along those lines?
It's more complicated to do sequential tasks.
Like chores?
Well, not so much that, but let's see. Maybe I'll switch a little bit. Where'd you park your car? You drive your car to the Walmart. You park it in the lot. It's a crowded lot. You go into the store. You come out. My brain doesn't track where the car was parked.
Do you have workarounds to?
Well, yeah. But what I have to say is I'm in quadrant X, and I'm in the left part of quadrant X, and I'm leaving the car there. I have to make a conscious effort to say, this is the marker where the car is. Whereas when you go to Walmart, you know where you put it, and you just go into Walmart, do your shopping, and come back out and go back to your car without a lot of fuss.
Yeah.
But for my brain, that's not the case. That's a simple example, but then more complicated tasks that involve, I was talking about sequencing, are, the simple way I would put it is, if I ran off some stuff on a printer and then I ran off other stuff that had to integrate it with, I would have trouble putting the two stacks together in sequential order that they needed to be placed. I sound a little abstract. I wish I had a better example, but it's not tracking disparate sequences that you're engaging in a way that I wouldn't even think about.
So if you were working at the university, you would run into that a lot, probably. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of office tasks that require sequencing and remembering steps and stuff.
Right.
Like Sakai, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Would have been harder for you.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
Huh. Well, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but how do you feel about dying this year?
One part of me wants to get it over with. It sounds a little strange.
Why?
Well, just because I don't want to be confused. I hate not being able to navigate, and I hate not being able to read. And I can read now, but I would hate the prospects of that going away.
Intellectual abilities, of course, are important to everyone, but to people like you and me, it's it's everything.
Yeah. So that would be, that's the big sadness about losing that. And
So you're frustrated with
and
that.
then I get frustrated with, dealing with Dignitas. Like I had to write their letter of request 3 different times. Dignitas, I think, is somewhat set up to not be super specific so that they want to see if you can take the reins.
Yeah.
And so I sent them the request letter, and in the request letter, for example, I asked them about the fee, because I wasn't quite clear about it. Well, you can't put anything about money in the request letter. They don't say that, so you got to redo the request letter. But there are a bunch of other technical details that they don't specify in the request letter that you have to, the only way you know is by submitting it and saying, no, that's not right. And this is why it's not right. And I had to go through 3 rounds of that. That's just the request.
And are you approved?
Yeah. Well, I'm approved so far. I've gone to the stage which they call the provisional green light. That's their phrasing.
And what's the next step?
Well, the next step is a more complicated one where you have to produce, for example, certified copies of your birth certificate, of your marriage certificate, things like that, certified, and they have to be certified within, I think, 6 weeks of going there.
Yeah.
So, dental charts, things like that. A lot of medical stuff they want.
Dental charts?
Yeah, they want dental charts.
Why?
I guess to have a definitive way of identifying the body.
Why can't you just show your ID?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know the deal, but they want my dental records.
Jiminy crickets.
And it has to be certified.
I know this is kind of a weird question, but a lot of these, I'm not accustomed to asking these questions,
Well,
Paul.
who is?
If something goes awry with Digitas, have you thought about doing it on your own terms?
Yeah, but I prefer not to.
Right. Would that happen if things fell through?
Sure,
with
well,
this?
yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought in detail about that?
Yeah.
Wow. Have you talked with Victoria about that?
Yeah.
How does she feel about it?
Well, it has to be something I do on my own. She can't have anything to do with it.
Right.
So it's complicated.
Yeah. Whereas with Digitas, she will be in the room?
She'd be in the room with my son and my daughter-in-law.
Wow. Golly.
And basically, you see the individual fall asleep.
Yeah, but Jesus Christ.
But they're not going to wake up.
When people die, it's hard, of course.
Yeah.
There's just something different about this, which I get, and I think it's the right choice, the moral choice, the compassionate choice, the self-centered choice, really, the selfish choice, but the selfless choice. And yet, the typical course is, cancer or heart disease, and they decline, and you're in and out of the hospital, and you're given, weeks or months to live, and then you go up, there's all these talks, and then you're in hospice, and you're in pain, and then they put you on a lot of meds, and you're kind of in and out of consciousness, and you just slow kind of slip away, and then eventually you just stop breathing, right?
Yeah.
And maybe people are there, but it feels like, I don't know the metaphor, but it feels like a symphony that is slowly getting softer and quieter. And at a certain point, you don't even notice when it's no longer making sound. Whereas with this, it's just suddenly just like in the middle of a symphony, you're just like, I'm done. The conductor just walks off the stage and says that's it. End of music.
Yeah. Well, it's the only way I know how to avoid the...
Totally.
The
but
downside.
it feels, I don't know how to process. I've never, I strangely have an analogous situation when you have to put down your animals, your pets.
Sure. By the way, they use sodium pentobarbital to put them down.
Oh, really?
That's the same. I mean, if you ask a veterinarian to euthanize your pet, that's what they use.
Huh. Well.
And it's very peaceful.
Yeah.
So that's the primary.
But there's I don't know, death is hard.
Yeah. So the idea, though, a peaceful death is preferred over a more violent one.
Yeah.
And most of the other alternatives, like guns and ropes, are violent. The two most, you probably know this from your clinical training, the two most prevalent ways that people commit suicide in the United States is through guns primarily, and then ropes are the second one.
It's the primary use of guns.
Yeah. Well, we have the most, as you know, we have one of the most, we have one of the highest gun death rates in the world, and the people, a huge part of gun deaths are not accidental; they're suicidal.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know.
So the idea is a peaceful one,
Yeah.
not a violent one, which is what you mostly read about, and one where your loved ones can be there.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're conscious right up until the end.
Right. So,
But man, I can't imagine.
I mean, it's something that it's hard to think about. It's hard to deal with it, but it's the most, given that I don't want to go through the whole 9 yards, that it's the only thing I can think of that is humane and loving and peaceful.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
No.
Do you have...
Not. I mean, I believe that our matter converts into energy. That kind of
your
thing.
Consciousness.
But no, I don't. I think it's the end of consciousness.
Do you have dark nights of the soul?
What do you
Sometimes do you have, like, I'm not in your situation, and when my head hits the pillow and my mind has a chance to contemplate things that I would be distracted from otherwise, I think about the end of myself and the universe and the abyss, and it's at the very least disappointing, and at worst, it's the most visceral terror I could ever feel.
Yeah.
Do you have those feelings?
Not particularly, but I think it's so hard to imagine death without inserting consciousness as part of it. But I don't think there is any consciousness after when you die.
Yeah, there's no abyss because there's no awareness.
But one of the things that religion does is it gives a different explanation of how we can retain a sense of ourself.
Yeah.
And so that I think human beings can't tolerate the idea that it's lights out, because that's all they know. That is being human, it's being conscious, and they can't imagine a state of being that is different from that. Mm-hmm. But I actually think, and that's why I think that serves the spiritual purposes that people conjure, because they want to have a meaning that's associated with some form of consciousness, so that they don't feel like that's just it. But right. I think what's it is the love, the compassion, and the way you lived your life and the way you've treated people. That's what you leave. Mm-hmm. But you don't take a new kind of consciousness with you. You leave it.
Yeah.
You leave your legacy by what you've done and how you've related to people.
So you're frustrated with the process at Digitas.
Yeah.
And you're frustrated with your symptoms as they are and will progress. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, you're peaceful?
Yeah.
Wow.
But, I'm not exactly looking forward to it.
What do you mean?
Why would I look forward to killing myself?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But I'm doing it because I don't want the other repercussions that we talked about.
Totally.
So,
Are you...
I'm resigned to it.
Uh-huh. But were you angry or depressed about it?
No, I don't think I've ever really had. I mean, I'm sad about it. Giving up something that's precious. And, it's I think I've mentioned this before. I came all this way, and then, I'm 77, and all of a sudden instead of being able to look forward to grandchildren and things like that,
right.
Nothing.
Kind of like Sandy, she retired, and soon after she died.
Yeah.
It's like there's a sick irony there.
Yeah, my son, as you know my son, Nick, he's having a hard time with it.
Yeah, I imagine.
So.
In Victoria.
Yeah.
Myself, everybody, I'm sure.
Sure.
Your clients? You have clients. You had clients.
Yeah, I have not told them.
You haven't told your clients?
No. Well, I retired.
From your practice?
Yes, but they're legal.
You didn't tell them why you were closing your practice?
No, because there's legal complications involved.
There is?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because if your memory's not working and you're working with
But why
people,
didn't you tell them that
Well, I didn't know I had Alzheimer's.
Oh,
But when I found out, I did not purposely
Reach out back
There
to
was
them.
like a 2 or 3 month thing where I'm closing my practice down.
so you were closing your practice down because of the memory issues.
Yeah.
But you didn't know you had Alzheimer's.
No.
And you were planning on practicing for
Yeah.
years to come.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't. But my neurologist, as well as Victoria, emphasized to get going on it.
Have you considered, I don't know, sending an announcement to your past clients?
No. No.
Just,
I don't. I have to check. I don't know.
do you think any of them would want to know?
Oh yeah, you're sure. I haven't thought that out that thoroughly though. I was more worried about any legal implications, which the neurologist emphasized.
Like they would sue you for?
Well, or they might feel like I wasn't all there.
And sue you?
Well, well, I guess. I think what the neurologist was most emphasized was that if I made a mistake, I didn't remember something, or I was asked to do something, and there was a negative consequence, that would make me liable.
Right. Which is why one would close down the
Right,
practice.
right.
But I don't think letting them know, do you have any litigious clients that would want to come after you because of that?
No.
Plus, I don't think it would hold water. I mean,
No, no.
you did everything you could, and you closed the practice as soon as you could. So
Yeah.
I don't see what the standing would be. To me, I would just think some clients would want to know, and
Yeah.
of course it's up to you,
Yeah.
but they, one, might find out from this podcast.
Right.
But they might, once you pass, there might be some obituary or story in a newspaper or something,
Yeah,
and they would
right.
read that. And I would imagine that they would have wanted to, because, if they hear about it in the newspaper, they might wonder if you knew when you were terminating with them, which you didn't, which they
Well,
might.
you're making a good argument. I haven't really got that far, but that's something to think about.
Yeah.
I'm not. I was just more focused on wrapping things up.
Right.
And a lot of the clients I've been seeing, the ones when I retired that I was seeing were people I've been seeing for years.
Right.
So, memory wasn't a key element because I had already
Right.
knew about them. And my long-term memory is pretty good. It's pretty good shape.
Yeah. What's your longest client you've ever had?
15 years.
Yeah.
Mostly people who are, borderline or
Right.
need someone to kind of be their
Yeah.
guide and, help them recalibrate.
Yeah.
And because it's, that disorder is filled with so much dysregulation, depending on someone to help them sort out things and, make decisions without them killing themselves or somebody else. They get so dysregulated. As you know, with that disorder, all kinds of very minor things send them into incredible dysregulation, and they get all worked up about stuff.
And they really benefit from long-term.
Yeah, and they
Attachment-based
just need,
therapy.
they need somebody to just kind of listen to them and not get too, help them. I mean, essentially, borderline is they don't have perspective, and they don't know how to their limbic system is so wired that they can't recalibrate easily, and they need someone constantly to listen, not tell them they're crazy, and at the same time to say, well, maybe some of the things, the evil that you are conjuring may be less intense than you see right now.
So at the end of this segment that we're talking, is there anything you'd like to say about this topic in addition?
No, but it was fun to hear you talk about your relationship with me because I've never heard a rendition of it.
I've told you it before.
Well, not in the way you just, you gave
Maybe not that elaborate. But
Yeah, it was interesting because some of the stuff, like, I didn't remember some of the details,
yeah.
like asking you to
Teach.
teach and things like that. I forgot about how that.
I have a lot of memories from that.
I forgot
time.
about how that took place.
I have a lot of memories. But is there anything you would like to say more about dying?
No, I pretty much described that. I don't have a lot more. I just hope I can get through the Dignitas thing in one piece.
Do you think that the Dignitas thing is like occupying all of your soul so that you can't stop to...
That's a good observation. You remember what I was like around accreditation?
Yeah.
And there would be something wrong with something, and we had to fix it. If we didn't fix it, and it would preoccupy me.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same. I'm geared to, there's an obstacle of, obsessing about it.
Yeah.
And so the Dignitas has taken up that.
Is that a good thing?
No, but it's
a thing.
It's something you need to have if you want to get it done.
Does your wife get frustrated with you about this?
No.
How does she feel about it?
Well, she's devastated.
Yeah.
But she leaves it pretty much up to me.
Yeah.
So she doesn't do any pinch hitting or anything. It's up to me to. But it's so unbelievably bureaucratic to get this done.
Yeah. Well, she was the one that told me, because I was talking with her about Jerry dying.
Yeah.
Jerry and her were very close.
Very close, yeah.
Like, you were very close to Jerry, but your wife was really close to Jerry. Mm-hmm. And Jerry dying, Jerry was at your house for dinner, mm-hmm. and he was driving home, and he mm-hmm. went to the store and got out of his car and got hit.
Yep.
So he dies, and in the same period of time, your wife knows that you have Alzheimer's and that you're going to be dying soon. So for her, her life is just completely upended.
Yeah.
Final question about this for now. When you think about what you've left behind, both family, love, all the good times, in addition to that, there's your career. And I've always said, and I've said this to your face, that I think a wing of the university should be named after you because of how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into it, and how many people, professors, students, clients down the line benefited from you being a workaholic, frankly. Like you worked a lot, and it was your project, it was your mission to make this thing work for everybody. And you didn't get paid very much, you know that. Antioch doesn't pay what it should. Not that they can necessarily, because it's not like there's some owner that's walking away with billions of dollars or anything. It's a tough business, but how would you like people to remember you?
Somewhat the same as I would like people to remember me as a therapist, that I was able to help them recalibrate or shift the way they think about themselves or they feel about themselves, and that they became, in the case of Antioch, better therapists, in the case of clients, better people. So
you think of yourself as a therapist who happened to be a professor teaching a class?
Well, no, both professor and
yeah.
teacher.
But I mean, the vibe of helping people to connect with themselves and know themselves.
Right, yeah.
Regardless of clients or students.
Yeah.
You'd like to be known for that.
Yeah. Other than that, the stuff at Antioch, it's a little bit disappointing in some ways, but I mean, you're singing my praises, but I think at Antioch, you just kind of disappear. That's it, and
right.
Nobody really gives a shit.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, be so cold, but
well, I don't think that's true. I mean, I'm sure. I assumed that for myself. Like when we were at the memorial for Jerry at Antioch a few weeks ago, I assumed I would walk into the building and no one would know me or care about me, or mm-hmm. I just thought, well, it's been a while since I've had much contact with these folks, so I'll just sit in the back and mm-hmm. I'll be invisible and I'll silently walk out when mm-hmm. it's over. But as you and I were both experiencing, there's all these people, colleagues and students mm-hmm. and others coming up to us going up to them. Yeah. There's a connection, a goodwill, an appreciation that I think is definitely there, but I think maybe people like you and I just assume it's gone or something.
Well, I was just speaking more institutionally. It's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you have, I mean, you and I don't even know the new administrators because they were hired because there's such a revolving door of administrators.
Yeah. So you devote, I've devoted a massive amount of my career and energy to Antioch, and I'm sure it's a good program and et cetera, but there's no
statue.
There's no legacy or anything like that. It's just like you're replaced by somebody else, and they just go on and do something new, and maybe I'm on some paperwork somewhere, but that's about it.
Maybe not even that.
Not even that, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's the part. But as far as the people, obviously that's been.
You might be in the handbook. I mean, I wrote you into the handbook as the founder, and I told the history. When I wrote the handbook, when I became chair, I had a history of the program page because just a page write up, and I included because it's kind of interesting, and I think like if you're a student in the program, you would want to know what the history is, and other instructors as well. But so you might still be in the handbook, but anyway,
I have no idea. But I don't. That part I don't particularly see as much recognition goes with that. Yeah. That part, but with the students, of course. Yeah. And of course, I still have relationships with some of those people. So.
Right. So that's what you value, is that connection and that humanness and vulnerability that you would cultivate with your clients, with your students, and your coworkers.
Yeah.
That's what you want to be remembered for.
Mm-hmm. And Jennifer Sampson's been really quite wonderful in reaching out to me.
She's the current program director.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
Some of the others that are no longer there, like, I have no idea what.
Do they even know?
I have no idea.
But do they know what's happening with you?
No, I have no idea.
Yeah, I doubt they know.
I don't have any connection with them.
Yeah.
Nor do I particularly want any connection with them.
Yeah. I suppose, on your way out, you could start talking shit about all sorts of people.
I suppose, yeah.
There's no political fallout.
No, I guess not. But,
Well, Paul, thanks for coming on the podcast. And everyone out there, so I always end every episode with, take care of yourself because you deserve it. So I will say, everyone out there, take care of yourself. But why, Paul, should people take care of themselves?
Well, the essence of a competent human being is that they can take care of themselves. So if you can't take care of yourself and you don't feel competent, then you're going to feel depressed or anxious.
Okay.
And also take care of others.